The mop handle splintered before Thomas Miller understood what was happening. One moment he held the worn wooden shaft still damp from cleaning the executive floor's marble tiles. The next, Diana Sterling's manicured hands gripped it, yanked it from his grasp, and brought it down hard across her knee. The crack echoed through the 40th floor hallway like a gunshot. Wood fragments scattered across polished concrete that probably cost more per square foot than Thomas earned in a week. He watched them fall, each piece tumbling in slow motion, catching the fluorescent light from overhead fixtures he'd cleaned just yesterday. His hands remained frozen in the position they'd held, the mop fingers still curved around phantom wood. Diana Sterling stood 3 feet away, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling beneath a charcoal suit that probably cost what Thomas used to make in a month back when he owned Miller's Engine Works. Her eyes burned with something beyond anger. Contempt, maybe? Or satisfaction at finally having an excuse to do what she'd wanted to do for months. 300 employees packed the hallway behind her. Thomas could feel their stares like physical weight pressing against his shoulders. Some had phones out already recording. Others simply watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash. Nobody moved to intervene. Nobody spoke. Diana's voice cut through the silence, sharp enough to draw blood. "You think you can fix my $3 million engine?" She threw the broken mop at his feet. The pieces clattered against his worn work boots, scattering further across the floor he'd just cleaned. "You can't even hold on to a mop without my permission." Thomas didn't move, didn't flinch. Something in his chest had gone very still, very quiet. The part of him that had learned to make himself small, invisible, unremarkable during 3 years of pushing maintenance carts through these hallways, recognized this moment as dangerous. "Walk away," it whispered. "Apologize. Disappear back into the shadows where people like Diana Sterling couldn't see you." But another part of him, buried deeper, dormant for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed, was waking up. That part remembered standing in his father's garage in Detroit, hands black with grease, learning to hear what engines were trying to say. It remembered owning his own shop, solving problems that stumped mechanics with twice his experience and half his humility. It remembered being somebody instead of nobody. Diana stepped closer. Her breath touched his face, carrying the scent of expensive coffee and entitlement. 2 hours. Fixed what MIT couldn't fix in 8 weeks. In front of everyone. In front of my investors. In front of the whole goddamn world. Her smile belonged on the predator, sizing up wounded prey. "When you fail, and you will fail, I'll destroy you. Not just fire you. Destroy you. Your name will be poison in every engine shop from here to Detroit." The mention of Detroit hit Thomas like a physical blow. Images cascaded through his mind unbidden. His father bent over an engine block in their garage, teaching 10-year-old Thomas to distinguish between the healthy purr of proper combustion and the subtle stutter that meant trouble. Sarah in their tiny apartment kitchen, laughing at something on the radio while she made dinner, her hair catching the late afternoon sun. The sign above his shop, Miller's Engine Works, swinging gently in the wind on the day he finally paid off the bank loan and owned it outright. All of it gone, sold, liquidated, turned into numbers on medical bills that kept coming even after Sarah stopped breathing. Thomas looked at the broken mop at his feet. Then he looked at Diana Sterling. The words came from somewhere deep, from the part of him that had been sleeping, but was now fully awake. Start the clock. 60 seconds earlier, Thomas Miller had been invisible. That had been the deal he'd made with himself 3 years ago, standing in a cemetery in Dearborn while they lowered Sarah's casket into frozen ground. Stay quiet, stay small, stay alive. Cash the paycheck. Pay the bills. Don't make waves. Invisibility was survival. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching his father work 32 years at Ford without a single promotion, without recognition, without anyone in management even learning his name. The day Thomas buried his wife taught him everything he needed to know about what pride costs a man with empty pockets. Pride couldn't pay for experimental treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Pride couldn't add extra months to a terminal diagnosis. Pride couldn't stop pancreatic cancer from devouring someone from the inside out, cell by cell, until the woman you loved weighed 90 pounds and could barely lift her head from the pillow. So Thomas had set pride aside. He'd sold his shop for half what it was worth because the buyer knew desperation when he smelled it. He'd sold the house, the cars, the tools his father had passed down, everything except the memories, and a worn notebook filled with engine diagrams and solutions to problems nobody had asked him to solve. Then he disappeared into the kind of work where nobody looked at you. Nobody asked your opinion. Nobody expected anything except clean floors and empty trash cans. Sterling Engine Works had hired him without a real interview. The HR representative barely glanced at his application, focusing instead on the background check that came back clean and the references from temp agencies that confirmed he showed up on time and didn't cause trouble. The job paid $13 an hour with minimal benefits, just enough to cover rent on a one-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevator worked maybe 3 days out of 7. Thomas had taken it and made himself invisible, which turned out to be easier than he'd expected. People didn't see janitors. They saw obstacles, to step around inconveniences, to ignore furniture that occasionally moved and required acknowledgement only when it was in the way. In 3 years, maybe a dozen people at Sterling had learned his name. A few more might recognize his face if pressed. The rest looked right through him like he was made of glass. But Diana Sterling had just changed the rules. The timeline Thomas had built for himself, the careful architecture of invisibility and survival, cracked and began to crumble. He could feel it happening, could feel the protective shell he'd constructed around himself starting to split. Part of him wanted to run, wanted to grab his maintenance cart and disappear down the service elevator, quit via text message, vanish back into the anonymous mass of people who worked jobs nobody noticed and lived lives nobody cared about. Another part of him, the part that had been sleeping, refused. 6 hours before Diana Sterling broke the mop, Thomas Miller pushed his maintenance cart through the executive floor at Sterling Engine Works. The hallway was empty at 5:30 in the morning. Most employees wouldn't arrive until 8. Executives rarely appeared before 9. Thomas had learned their schedules during his first month, mapping out when he could work undisturbed, when he needed to make himself especially invisible, when he could take an extra 5 minutes in the bathroom without anyone noticing he was gone. His route through the building had become automatic. 4th floor at 5 3rd floor by 6 2nd floor by 7. Break room cleanup during the 8 o'clock rush when people were too focused on coffee and email to register his presence. Then the executive floor, saved for last because it required the most care and because it gave him access to the workshop. Sterling's main workshop occupied half of the 40th floor, separated from the executive offices by soundproof glass walls that allowed observation without interference. Inside, engineers and technicians worked on projects that represented millions of dollars in contracts and years of research and development. Thomas had watched them through those glass walls for 3 years, observing their methods, noting their mistakes, seeing problems they couldn't see because they were too close or too credentialed or too certain of their own expertise. The marine engine had arrived 8 weeks ago. Thomas had been cleaning the executive conference room when the delivery team wheeled it in, wrapped in protective covering, accompanied by men in expensive suits who spoke in hushed tones about breakthrough technology and guaranteed performance. He'd heard enough to understand the basics. Custom built for a Japanese client, precision German engineering, contract worth $200 million if Sterling could deliver. Potential for ongoing partnership worth 10 times that amount. The engine had been beautiful even under wrapping. Thomas had glimpsed chrome and steel through gaps in the protective material, had seen the careful integration of components that spoke to genuine craftsmanship. For a moment, standing there with his mop, invisible and ignored, he'd felt the old hunger wake up. The desire to touch, to examine, to understand how the pieces fit together and what sounds they would make when everything worked correctly. Then Diana and Sterling had walked past trailing executives and assistants, and Thomas had remembered his place. Janitor. Invisible. Nobody. But he'd started listening. Every morning after the executive floor was empty, Thomas would stop outside the workshop door. The soundproofing was good, but not perfect. If he stood very still, if he focused, if he let his mind quiet the way his father had taught him, he could hear the engine running inside, could hear it struggling, fighting itself, trying to find a rhythm it couldn't quite achieve. The first few times, Thomas told himself he was imagining it. The door was too thick, the soundproofing too effective. He was hearing what he wanted to hear, projecting his own knowledge onto faint vibrations that meant nothing. But the sound was real, he was certain, and the problem was obvious, at least to him. The engine was confused, receiving conflicting information from its own systems, trying to satisfy contradictory parameters that made sustained operation impossible. Every morning, the engineers would run tests. Every morning, the engine would operate normally for exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Then something would go wrong. Temperature spikes, pressure irregularities, emergency shutdown to prevent damage. Thomas had noted the pattern in his worn notebook, one he kept in his maintenance uniform alongside cleaning supplies and the sandwich he brought from home. He'd sketched diagrams based on sounds he could barely hear, calculations built on assumptions about specifications he'd never seen. It was pointless. Nobody would ever ask for his opinion. Nobody would ever know he'd spent his nights studying engine schematics, downloaded from technical forums, and his mornings listening to a machine worth more than he'd earn in a lifetime. But he couldn't stop himself. The problem existed. He knew how to solve it. The fact that nobody would listen, that nobody even knew he existed, didn't change the fundamental truth that something was broken, and he understood how to fix it. That morning, standing outside the workshop door, listening to the engine fight itself, Thomas had made a decision. Not a conscious one, not a plan. Just a recognition that staying invisible was slowly killing him, that 3 years of pretending to be nobody was turning him into nobody, that if he kept walking this path, he would eventually forget he'd ever been anything else. He'd reached out and tested the workshop door handle. Locked, of course. Security protocols meant only authorized personnel could access sensitive project areas. But Thomas had keys. Maintenance staff needed access everywhere. He'd never used them for anything except his assigned duties, had never even considered it. His hand had been on the keyring when footsteps echoed down the hallway. Thomas had frozen, hard hammering, caught between the desire to enter and the knowledge of what would happen if he was discovered. The footsteps grew closer. Thomas had grabbed his mop, pretended to clean an already spotless section of floor, and watched from the corner of his eye as a security guard passed without even glancing in his direction. Invisible. That close call should have been enough. Should have reminded him of the dangers of being seen, of breaking the rules that protected people like him from people like Diana Sterling. But as the day went on, as Thomas moved through his duties with mechanical precision, he couldn't stop thinking about that engine, about the problem only he could hear, about the solution only he knew. By evening, when most employees had gone home and the building settled into its after-hours quiet, Thomas found himself back on the 40th floor. Not cleaning this time, just standing outside the workshop door listening. The engineers had run another test before leaving. Thomas had heard it from 3 floors down, the familiar pattern of startup operation and failure. 11 minutes, 47 seconds, exactly as always. Then silence. Then frustrated voices as they documented another failed attempt and speculated about causes they couldn't identify. Thomas had pulled out his notebook and added another entry. Day 56, same result. Problem persists, solution remains obvious. He'd been so focused on writing that he didn't hear Diana Sterling approach until her voice cut through his concentration. "I asked you a question, janitor." Thomas had looked up to find her standing 15 feet away, arms crossed, expression hovering somewhere between annoyance and curiosity. Behind her, 2 men in suits Thomas didn't recognize. Investors, probably, or board members. People important enough that Diana Sterling herself was giving them a personal tour at 8 o'clock at night. Thomas realized with growing horror that he'd been so absorbed in his notebook that he'd failed to hear them coming, had failed to make himself invisible, had violated the cardinal rule of survival by being noticed. "I'm sorry, ma'am." His voice had come out rough from disuse. Thomas didn't talk much these days. Didn't have anyone to talk to. "I'll move to another floor." He'd started to push his cart toward the elevator, but Diana's voice stopped him. "No, stay." Her heels clicked against concrete as she walked toward him, each step deliberate and predatory. "I want to know why security keeps reporting that you spend extra time near my workshop, that you stop outside the door and listen." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He'd been careful. 3 years of careful, but apparently not careful enough. "I wasn't, don't lie to me." Diana stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Thomas could smell her perfume, something expensive and aggressive. "I own this building. I own every camera in this building. I've watched you, Thomas Miller, every night for the past 2 weeks, standing outside that door like some kind of creep." Marcus Webb appeared behind her, lead engineer, Harvard MBA, the kind of man who'd never pushed a mop in his life. Thomas recognized him from observations through the glass walls, had watched him struggle with the marine engine for 8 weeks applying solutions that treated symptoms instead of addressing the core problem. Diana. Maybe we should... Shut up, Marcus. Diana never took her eyes off Thomas. I want to hear his excuse. Thomas swallowed. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory advice from a man who'd worked 3 jobs and raised 5 kids and understood what it meant to navigate a world that didn't value people like them. Some battles you walk away from, boy. Some battles walk towards you. The trick is knowing which is which. This battle had found him. Walking away now wouldn't make Diana forget. Wouldn't erase the security footage. Wouldn't restore his invisibility. That protection was already gone. The engine. His voice came out quiet but steady. The marine engine, the one your team's been working on for 8 weeks. I can hear what's wrong with it. Silence. Then Diana laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, a cruel laugh that echoed through the empty corridor and made Marcus Webb look at the floor like he wanted to disappear into it. You can hear it. Diana wiped her eyes, still laughing. Oh, this is precious. This is absolutely precious. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Marcus, wake everyone up. Board members, engineers, the Japanese investors at the Ritz, everyone. I want them here in 1 hour. Diana, it's 11 p.m. I don't care if it's 3 in the goddamn morning. Diana's smile turned predatory, the kind of expression Thomas had seen before on people who enjoyed hurting others, who derived genuine pleasure from watching people smaller than them suffer. Our janitor thinks he's an engineer. I want the whole world to watch what happens next. The call had come at 11:47. Within 40 minutes, Sterling Engine Works transformed from quiet evening emptiness to something resembling organized chaos. Thomas watched from his position near the workshop door as employees filed into the main conference hall, adjacent to the workshop, most still in pajamas or hastily thrown on clothes, all sensing blood in the water. The Japanese delegation arrived in black sedans, 3 executives Thomas didn't recognize but whose body language suggested both importance and impatience. They took seats in the front row without speaking, faces carefully, neutral eyes sharp and evaluating. Then the woman entered. Thomas recognized her immediately, even though they'd never met. Dr. Margaret Chen. Her reputation had preceded her for decades. 62 years old, former Boeing engineer, 53 patents, the woman who designed guidance systems for spacecraft and power plants for submarines. When Margaret Chen watched you work, people said you were either being recruited or executed. There was no middle ground. She sat beside the Japanese delegation, pulled out a tablet, and began taking notes. She didn't look at Thomas directly, but he could feel her attention, like weight, like pressure, like the sensation of being measured against standards he couldn't see but instinctively understood he was failing to meet. Camera crews set up in 3 corners. Marketing had mobilized with impressive speed, already streaming live to social media platforms where hashtags were trending and viewer counts were climbing. Thousands of people watching, then tens of thousands. The number kept rising. Thomas stood at the front of the room in his maintenance uniform, holding a mop that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sweat ran down his back despite the air conditioning. His hands trembled. Not now, he told himself. Not yet. Hold it together. Ladies and gentlemen. Diana's voice filled the room, amplified by a microphone that turned her words into weapons. I apologize for the hour, but tonight we're going to witness something special. She gestured toward Thomas like a ringmaster presenting a circus animal. This is Thomas Miller. For 3 years, he's cleaned our toilets and emptied our trash cans. Tonight, he informed me that he, a janitor with no degree, no credentials, no qualifications whatsoever, can repair the engine that our MIT and Harvard engineers couldn't fix in 8 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thomas could hear disbelief, mockery, the kind of dismissive laughter that people use when confronting something absurd. A few employees looked uncomfortable, like they understood this was wrong, but lacked the courage to object. Most seemed excited, eager to watch what would happen next. Diana walked toward Thomas, slowly, deliberately circling him like prey. So I'm giving him a chance. 2 hours. In front of all of you, in front of Mr. Yamamoto, whose patience we've tested far too long. She gestured toward one of the Japanese executives, an elderly man with silver hair and eyes that revealed nothing. In front of the entire world watching online. Diana stopped inches from Thomas's face, close enough that he could see the tiny imperfections in her makeup, the fine lines around her eyes that expensive cosmetics couldn't quite hide. Fix the engine, janitor. Fix it and I'll make you workshop manager. Six-figure salary, benefits, everything you've never earned. Her voice dropped to a whisper that the microphone still caught and amplified. But when you fail, and we both know you'll fail, I won't just fire you. I'll make sure you never work with engines again. Not here, not anywhere, not even changing oil at a Jiffy Lube in the middle of nowhere. She snapped her fingers inches from his eyes. Your name will be garbage. Your reputation will be garbage. You will be garbage. The snap echoed. Thomas blinked. For a moment, he was somewhere else. Different room, different woman, same year. Sarah's hospital room had smelled like disinfectant and death. The doctors had tried to mask it with air fresheners, but Thomas could still detect the underlying rot, the scent of cancer eating his wife from the inside out. She'd been in bed for 2 weeks by that point, too weak to stand, barely strong enough to breathe. Tommy. Her voice had been a whispered breath rattling in lungs that were slowly filling with fluid, despite the drainage tubes and medication. Promise me you won't give up. I promise. Promise me you'll remember who you are. I will. Promise me. She'd coughed, blood flecking her lips. The nurse had rushed over with tissues, gently wiping Sarah's mouth, while Thomas held her hand and felt the bones like twigs beneath paper-thin skin. Promise me you'll find your way back. Sarah had died 11 minutes later. Thomas had watched her final breath, watched the monitors flatline, watched the medical team go through the motions of attempted revival, even though everyone in the room knew it was over. Pancreatic cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. Everything they'd built sold to pay medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. Thomas Miller, master mechanic owner of Miller's Engine Works, had become Thomas Miller, janitor. Invisible man. He'd kept 2 of his promises to Sarah. He hadn't given up. He'd remembered who he was, but he'd never found his way back. Until now. Thomas looked at the broken mop pieces at his feet. Then he looked at Diana Sterling. Start the clock. Diana's smile flickered. She'd expected begging, excuses, maybe tears. Not quiet defiance. Not the calm certainty of someone who had already lost everything that mattered, and therefore had nothing left to fear. Excuse me? Thomas met her eyes, held her gaze, let her see that the man she thought she was humiliating had stopped caring about humiliation somewhere between his wife's last breath and the first night he'd mopped this floor. You said 2 hours. Start the clock. Dr. Margaret Chen leaned forward in her seat. Something had shifted in the room. The janitor's voice carried no fear, no desperation, just calm certainty that made her think of the old masters she'd trained under in Taiwan, men who understood machines in ways that transcended education and credentials, in everything the modern world thought mattered. Diana recovered quickly, forcing her smile back into place. Fine. Marcus, start the timer. Make sure every camera captures what's about to happen. She turned to the crowd with theatrical flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, place your bets. How long before our janitor realizes he's in over his head? Nervous laughter from the employees. The Japanese delegation remained stone-faced, watching Thomas with the kind of attention that suggested they were reserving judgment, waiting to see what would happen before deciding how to react. Thomas walked toward the workshop door. His bad knee ached, an old injury from his shop days that flared up in cold weather and never quite healed right. His hands still trembled, slightly adrenaline and exhaustion, and 3 years of buried emotion fighting their way to the surface. Behind him, Diana's voice carried across the conference hall. This is going to be the most entertaining 2 hours of my career. The workshop smelled like oil and failure. The engine dominated the room, a $3.5 million custom marine power unit that represented Sterling's biggest contract and biggest disaster. Chrome and steel, German precision, American ambition. 8 weeks of broken promises. Thomas approached it slowly while 300 people pressed against the glass walls to watch. Their faces blurred together into a mass of expectation and judgment. Somewhere in that crowd, cameras were recording every move, streaming his humiliation to viewers around the world. 119 minutes remaining. Diana's voice came through speakers mounted in the workshop ceiling. Better hurry, janitor. Thomas ignored her. He placed both hands flat against the engine block, closed his eyes, let everything else fall away. The crowd, the cameras, Diana Sterling, and her threats, the crushing weight of expectation. All of it dissolved until nothing remained except Thomas Miller and a machine that needed his help. His father had taught him this technique in the garage behind their house on Woodward Avenue. William Miller, 32 years at Ford, the man who could diagnose any engine by sound alone, by feel, by some instinct that couldn't be taught in engineering school or learned from textbooks. Every machine has a heartbeat, Tommy. His father's voice echoed from memory, steady and certain. Most people hear noise. They listen to the surface, the obvious sounds, the things any fool could identify. But if you listen, really listen, if you quiet your mind and open your senses, the engine will tell you exactly what's wrong. It'll speak to you like it's confessing sins. All you have to do is care enough to hear. William Miller had never gotten promoted, never received a recognition, never gotten the respect his genius deserved because he didn't have a degree, didn't have credentials, didn't have the right last name or the right skin color or the right connections to matter to people who made decisions about advancement and opportunity. He died on the floor of their garage, hands still covered in grease, working on an engine he'd never finish. Heart attack at 58. Thomas had been 16 when he found the body had stood there staring at his father's still form, while understanding crystallized that talent meant nothing without credentials, that genius meant nothing without the right background, that everything his father knew would disappear unless Thomas learned it, absorbed it, made it part of himself. So Thomas had spent the next 37 years trying to honor his father's legacy, building his own shop, teaching himself everything William couldn't teach him, becoming the kind of mechanic his father always deserved to be, but never got the chance to become. Then Sarah got sick. Everything fell apart. Thomas Miller, master mechanic, became Thomas Miller, janitor. But the gift remained, the ability to hear what others couldn't, the connection to machines that transcended training and credentials and degrees. His father's voice whispered from memory, from the garage, from every lesson learned, over engines that spoke only to those who knew how to listen. The engine doesn't care about your resume, son. It only cares whether you can hear its heartbeat. There. Thomas spoke suddenly, eyes still closed, hands still flat against the engine block. The conference hall fell silent. 300 people stopped breathing. There, what Marcus Webb's voice came through the speakers, sharp with skepticism and something that might have been fear. 2,400 RPM, every 3 seconds. You hear that stutter? Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Marcus through the glass wall. Marcus checked the monitors, fingers flying across keyboards. The readings show normal operation. Your readings are wrong. Thomas stepped back from the engine. That's part of the problem. The diagnostic software is calibrated for American standards. But this engine was built in Stuttgart. German engineering, metric precision. Your instruments are looking for the wrong symptoms. Diana laughed, the sound amplified and distorted through the speakers. A janitor telling MIT engineers their instruments are wrong. This is priceless. Thomas pulled out his worn notebook, the one he'd filled over 3 years of late-night observations and early morning listening sessions. He flipped to pages covered in diagrams and calculations and technical notes written in cramped handwriting during breaks and lunch hours and moments stolen from duties that kept him invisible. The fuel injection system. He held up a diagram for the cameras to see. German-built, calibrated to bar units, precision to hundredths of a millimeter. But your control unit is American. It reads PSI. It expects looser tolerances. Every time the engine runs, the American brain tries to correct problems that don't exist in the German body. Thomas looked directly at the main camera, speaking past Diana, past the crowd to the engineers who might actually understand. The fuel rail pressure sensor reads 3.5 bar. Your software converts that to 50.76 psi, but rounds to 50.8. That's a 0.07% error, insignificant by itself. But this engine has 47 interconnected systems. Each one compounds the error. By the time signals reach the main computer, you've got cascading failures the cooling system can't handle. Dr. Margaret Chen stood up. Her movement drew every eye in the room. She looked at Thomas with an expression he couldn't read, then spoke for the first time since arriving. How long before thermal overload? Thomas looked at her. Recognized in her eyes the same quality his father had possessed. The understanding that credentials and degrees and institutional approval meant nothing compared to actual knowledge, actual skill, actual ability to see truth that others missed. 12 minutes. maybe less. The accumulated errors create a feedback loop the cooling system can't handle. The engine shuts itself down to prevent damage. That's exactly what's been happening. Marcus admitted it reluctantly, voice carrying the weight of someone realizing he'd been beaten by a man he'd never considered competition. 11 minutes 47 seconds. Every single time. Diana's smile tightened. Thomas could see her recalculating, adjusting her strategy, searching for a way to turn this around and maintain control. So you've identified the problem. Congratulations. Any idiot can point at something and say it's broken. She crossed her arms. Can you actually fix it? Thomas reached into the diagnostic kit Marcus had prepared past the expensive equipment and proprietary tools to a small component tucked in the corner. A pressure regulation adapter, brushed aluminum, about the size of a hockey puck. Standard hardware available from any industrial supplier. This, he held it up for everyone to see. Diana stared at it like he'd pulled out a toy from a cereal box. That's a $50 part, 58. Thomas set it on the workbench. It's a metric to imperial bridge adapter. Instead of reprogramming the entire control system or replacing German components with American ones, we add a translator. The adapter converts metric output into readings the American software can process accurately. Silence. You're telling me that a $58 part could have solved a problem that's cost this company $3 million. Diana's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. Sometimes the most elegant solutions are the simplest. Thomas began working, hands moving with practiced precision. My father used to say complicated problems don't always need complicated answers. Sometimes you just need to help two systems understand each other. He worked quickly, efficiently, muscle memory taking over. 10,000 repairs, 10,000 diagnoses, 10,000 problems solved in Detroit garages and his own shop, and 100 places that never appreciated what they were witnessing. Each movement deliberate, each adjustment exact. No hesitation, no second guessing. The installation took 14 minutes. When Thomas stepped back, his hands had finally stopped shaking. His breathing had steadied, but inside his heart pounded like a war drum. This was it. The moment everything either vindicated 3 years of invisibility or confirmed Diana Sterling's assessment that he was nothing. Nobody garbage. This is it, Sarah. This is me finding my way back. He looked at the engine one more time, checking connections, verifying placement, making certain everything was exactly right. Then he turned to the glass wall where Marcus watched with an expression hovering between hope and dread. Ready for testing, the workshop fell silent. Diana checked the clock. 63 minutes remaining. You're cutting it close, janitor. Thomas nodded to Marcus. Start it. Marcus looked at Diana, who waved impatiently. His hand moved to the ignition. The room held its breath. 300 people. Thousands watching online. All of them waiting to see whether a janitor could succeed where engineers with degrees from the best schools in the country had failed. The engine roared to life. Thomas closed his eyes and listened. The stutter was gone. The desperate fighting rhythm that had plagued the machine for 8 weeks had been replaced by something smooth, something harmonious, something that sounded like it was finally breathing, finally free. Diagnostic screens flickered. Red warnings disappeared one by one, replaced by green indicators that made the engineering team gasp audibly. Marcus's voice came through the speakers, shaking but clear. Temperature stable, pressure optimal, fuel mixture perfect. The clock ticked. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The engine purred like a satisfied tiger, every component working in harmony, every system synchronized. 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. Diana's confidence began to crack. Her smile became rigid, forced. Thomas could see her hands gripping the railing in front of her, seat knuckles white with pressure. 11 minutes. The room held its breath. This was the moment. The precise point where every previous test had ended in smoke, in failure, in emergency shutdowns. The proof that either Thomas was right or that luck had carried him further than anyone expected. 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Someone in the crowd whimpered. Thomas opened his eyes, watched the timer, felt Sarah's presence beside him like she'd never left, like she was standing there watching him keep the third promise, the one he thought he'd never fulfill. 11 minutes, 45 seconds. Diana grabbed the edge of a table. Her face had gone pale. All the cruelty, all the predatory confidence had drained away, leaving behind something raw and frightened. 11 minutes, 58 seconds, 11 minutes, 59 seconds, 12 minutes. The engine kept running. 12 minutes, 15 seconds, 12 minutes, 30 seconds, 13 minutes. The room exploded. Engineers shouted at each other. Employees cheered. Someone started crying. The live stream comments scrolled so fast they became a blur of exclamation points in disbelief and celebration. 300 people who'd come to watch a janitor be humiliated were now witnessing something they couldn't quite believe, couldn't quite process. But Thomas Miller didn't celebrate. He stood beside the engine, one hand resting on its warm surface, feeling the steady heartbeat of a machine that had finally found its voice. Around him, chaos and joy and vindication swirled. But Thomas felt only quiet satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing he'd done what he said he would do, what his father would have done, what Sarah had believed he could do. Kenji Yamamoto rose from his chair. 73 years old, $4 billion, a lifetime of watching men succeed and fail. He began to clap slow, at first deliberate, then faster. His hands came together with steady rhythm that somehow cut through the chaos and drew every eye in the room. Then the entire conference hall joined him. 300 people applauding a janitor who'd just done the impossible. The sound built and built until it became deafening, became physical force pressing against Thomas from all sides. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Diana Sterling. She stood frozen by the window. Her face pale, her hands shaking, her perfect mask crumbling in front of everyone she'd ever intimidated. The hunter had become the hunted. The invisible man had finally been seen. And somewhere beyond the workshop, beyond the building, beyond everything Thomas could see or touch, Sarah was smiling. Part 1 complete. Word count 7,247. Words. I need to continue to reach the minimum 18,000 words. Let me expand significantly while maintaining freshness. 3 years before Diana Sterling broke the mob, Thomas Miller stood in a different room facing a different kind of destruction. The oncologist's office had diplomas on the wall, leather-bound medical texts on shelves, photographs of the doctor with various celebrities and politicians suggesting success and importance and expertise. None of it mattered. Stage 4. The words hung in air-conditioned silence. Sarah's hand tightened around Thomas's fingers, digging into his palm, hard enough to hurt. He welcomed the pain. It meant she was still alive, still fighting, still there. The doctor continued speaking, using words like aggressive and metastatic and treatment options, but Thomas heard only fragments. His mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere that understood, but refused to accept that processed information while simultaneously rejecting it as impossible. How long Sarah's voice came out steady, stronger than Thomas felt. She'd always been the strong one, the one who kept them grounded when Thomas got lost in engine problems, in business worries in his own head. The doctor hesitated. That hesitation told them everything they needed to know before he spoke. With treatment, 6 to 8 months. Maybe longer if we're fortunate. And without treatment, Thomas heard himself ask the question before realizing he'd spoken. Sarah looked at him shocked. But Thomas needed to know, needed to understand what they were facing. 3 to 4 months. The doctor folded his hands on his desk. But Mrs. Miller, I strongly recommend we pursue aggressive treatment. There are new protocols, experimental therapies that have shown promising results in clinical trials. How much? Sarah squeezed Thomas's hand again, this time in warning. They both knew what he was asking. How much would it cost to buy those extra months? How much would they have to pay to keep her alive? Just a little bit longer. The doctor's expression shifted, became uncomfortable. Medical professionals weren't supposed to discuss finances. They were supposed to focus on care, on healing, on doing everything possible regardless of cost. But Thomas and Sarah had learned during Sarah's mother's final illness that everything came with a price tag, that hope was expensive, that dying slowly cost more than dying fast. Insurance will cover some of it. The doctor pulled out forms and began explaining coverage percentages and out-of-pocket maximums and lifetime limits that Sarah had already hit during 2 previous cancer scares. Thomas listened to numbers that seemed impossible. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, more money than they had ever had, more than Miller's engine works generated in a good year. We'll figure it out. Sarah's voice again, still steady, still strong. Whatever it takes. We'll find a way. They'd left the oncologist's office holding hands, walking through a parking lot where other people went about their normal days, oblivious to the fact that Thomas Miller's entire world had just ended. In the car, Sarah finally broke. She cried silently, tears streaming down her face, while Thomas drove, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes focused on the road because looking at her would shatter whatever composure he had left. At home, they sat at their kitchen table and made lists. Assets, savings, retirement accounts, the house, the shop, everything they'd built together over 23 years of marriage, reduced to line items and estimated values and potential liquidation timelines. Miller's Engine Works was worth approximately $300,000 according to the business appraiser Thomas consulted that week. The property alone justified that valuation plus equipment, plus goodwill, plus the steady client base Thomas had cultivated through years of honest work and fair prices. But that was if he could find a buyer willing to pay market value. In a forced sale desperate to raise cash quickly, he'd be lucky to get half. The house had equity, not much but some, maybe $80,000 after paying off the mortgage. Sarah's car could be sold. Thomas's truck was paid off but worth only a few thousand. Retirement accounts held another $40,000, money they'd been saving for the future that no longer existed. All of it together, liquidated quickly, might generate $400,000. The oncologist's treatment plan would cost $600,000 over 8 months. More if complications arose. More if Sarah needed hospitalization. More if experimental therapies failed and they had to try additional options. The math didn't work. It had never worked. It would never work. They could sell everything empty. Every account, beg family for loans they'd never be able to repay and still come up short, still fail to buy enough time, still watch Sarah die while drowning in debt that would follow Thomas for the rest of his life. We'll make it work. Sarah kept saying it like a mantra, like repetition could transform impossible mathematics into something manageable. We'll sell the shop. We'll downsize the house. We'll figure it out, Tommy. We always do. But Thomas knew, had known from the moment the doctor said stage 4. This was the battle they couldn't win. This was the problem he couldn't fix. This was the engine that wouldn't start no matter how much knowledge he had, no matter how well he understood mechanics and systems and how to make broken things whole. The first month they tried to maintain normalcy. Sarah continued teaching aid work at the elementary school until the fatigue became too much. Thomas kept the shop running, though he noticed his hands shaking when he worked on engines, noticed his concentration slipping, noticed mistakes creeping into jobs he could have completed flawlessly a month earlier. The second month they sold the shop. A competitor made an offer, $150 cash, take it or leave it. The man knew Thomas was desperate, knew he had no leverage, knew he'd accept whatever was offered because he had no choice. Thomas signed the papers and watched someone else take ownership of everything his father had taught him to build. The third month they sold the house, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots echoed at night and the elevator worked maybe 3 days out of 7. Sarah hated it but said nothing, just smiled when Thomas apologized, just told him it was temporary, just kept pretending they'd get through this together. The fourth month, Sarah stopped eating, not intentionally. Her body simply rejected food. Everything came back up. The oncologist prescribed medications that cost $200 for a 30-day supply and helped maybe 20%. Sarah lost weight, 20 pounds, 30 pounds. Her clothes hung loose. Her wedding ring fell off while she was washing dishes and circled the drain before Thomas could catch it. The fifth month, they started the experimental treatment. Clinical trial at a research hospital 3 hours away. Thomas drove Sarah there twice a week, watched her sit in a chair, while poison dripped into her veins, drove her home while she vomited into a plastic bag and apologized for being sick. The 6th month, Sarah couldn't walk anymore, couldn't stand without help, couldn't make it to the bathroom alone. Thomas took leave from his new job, the one he'd found after selling the shop, working as a mechanic at a chain garage that paid $12 an hour and treated employees like interchangeable parts. His supervisor said, "Take all the time you need," but Thomas heard the unspoken message. "Take too much time and we'll find someone else." The 7th month, Sarah stopped speaking in complete sentences. Pain medication kept her sedated most of the day. When she was awake, she could manage a few words before exhaustion pulled her back under. Thomas sat beside her bed and held her hand and told her stories about their life together. Their wedding, their first apartment, the day they signed papers for the shop. Every good memory he could remember offered like gifts, like proof that their time together had mattered. The 8th month, Sarah died. She'd woken up lucid for the first time in days. Thomas had been dozing in the chair beside her bed 3 in the morning. The apartment silent except for the hum of the oxygen concentrator. Her voice woke him. Tommy. He jerked awake, nearly falling from the chair. I'm here, baby. I'm right here, Baiji. Her eyes were clear, focused, more present than she'd been in weeks. Promise me you won't give up. Sarah's hand found her grip surprisingly strong. Promise me, I promise. Thomas had felt tears on his face, hot and immediate. Promise me you'll remember who you are, not what you've lost. Who you are, I will. I promise me. She'd coughed, blood flecking her lips. Thomas had reached for the call button, but Sarah's hand stopped him. Promise me you'll find your way back. I don't know where, I don't know when, but promise me you'll keep going until you find yourself again. I promise, baby. I promise, Bushbine. Sarah had smiled, squeezed his hand one final time. Then her eyes had closed. Her breathing had slowed. The monitor beside her bed had begun its steady decline. Numbers dropping, alarms sounding, nurses rushing in. Thomas had sat there holding her hand, watching her die, feeling something inside himself die with her. The funeral was small. Sarah's cousin from Ohio. 2 friends from her teaching job. Thomas alone on his side because his father was dead and he'd lost touch with everyone else during the 8 months of medical crisis and financial collapse. The minister spoke about Sarah's kindness and faith in the better place she'd gone. Thomas stood there dry-eyed, cried out, empty of everything except the knowledge that he'd failed to save her, failed to find enough money or time or options to keep her alive. After the funeral, Thomas returned to the apartment, sat on the couch they'd bought together when they first moved in before they could afford better, looked at the photographs on shelves, Sarah smiling on their wedding day, Sarah laughing at some joke he'd made, Sarah healthy and whole and alive. The bills were still coming, would keep coming for years. Medical debt didn't disappear just because the patient died. Thomas had already filed for bankruptcy, but the process would take months and some debts wouldn't be discharged. He'd be paying for Sarah's death until he died himself. He needed work, needed income, needed something to fill the days now that watching Sarah die was no longer his full-time occupation. The chain garage had filled his position during his leave, sympathetic but firm. We can't hold jobs indefinitely, you understand. Thomas had applied for anything that didn't require much thought or interaction. Warehouse work, delivery driver, security guard, night shifts where he wouldn't have to talk to people, where he could disappear into repetitive tasks that required no creativity, no problem solving, no reminder of who he used to be. Sterling Engine Works had been hiring maintenance staff. 3rd shift, clean the offices and workshops after everyone else went home. $13 an hour, minimal benefits. No experience necessary. Thomas filled out the application, listed his address in the declining neighborhood where rent was cheap and expectations were low, past the background check, and started the following Monday. The first night, pushing his cart through empty hallways, Thomas had felt something inside himself shut down, not die. Dying would have been merciful. This was different. This was the conscious decision to stop being Thomas Miller, master mechanic problem solver, someone who mattered. To become instead Thomas Miller, janitor, invisible man, nobody. He'd made that choice deliberately, had recognized that trying to be someone to matter, to use his knowledge and skills, had gotten him nowhere except deeper in debt and more aware of his own powerlessness. Better to be nobody, better to be invisible, better to accept that the world didn't care about talent or knowledge or 37 years of learning to hear what engines were saying. For 3 years, Thomas had lived that choice. Had made himself small and quiet and unremarkable, had learned which routes through the building allowed him to avoid people, which times of day he could work undisturbed, which behaviors marked him as safe and forgettable. He'd become furniture, a function, not a person, until Diana Sterling broke the mop and forced him to remember who he used to be. The workshop door opened. Dr. Margaret Chen entered, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. Thomas stood beside the still-running engine, listening to its perfect heartbeat, waiting for whatever came next. You should sit down. Her voice carried authority, but not unkindness. You're shaking. Thomas looked at his hands. She was right. The adrenaline that had carried him through the past 2 hours was draining away, leaving behind exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. I'm fine, you're not fine. You just did something impossible under the impossible pressure. Your body is in shock. Dr. Chen guided him toward a chair. Sit. Breathe. The engine isn't going anywhere. Thomas sat. Around him the workshop buzzed with activity. Engineers crowded around diagnostic stations, verifying readings, running additional tests, documenting everything. The live stream had ended, but phones were still recording. Someone from marketing was already talking about press releases and media interviews. The door opened again. Kenji Yamamoto entered, moving slowly, deliberately, each step carrying the weight of decades in business. He approached Thomas's chair while conversation died and everyone watched. Mr. Miller. Thomas started to stand, but Yamamoto gestured for him to remain seated. Please, you have earned the right to rest. Yamamoto pulled a chair close and sat facing Thomas. Up close, Thomas could see the age in the old man's face, the wishes and weathering and weariness of someone who'd built empires and lost them, and built them again. I have a question for you. Yes, sir. Tonight you risked everything. Your job, your reputation, your future. Yamamoto's eyes were sharp despite his age, missing nothing. Why? Thomas was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. Pride, anger, 3 years of being invisible. The memory of his father dying unrecognized, the promise he'd made to Sarah. All of it tangled together into something he couldn't quite articulate. Because I could hear what was wrong. The words came out simpler than he'd intended. And I couldn't keep pretending I couldn't. Yamamoto nodded slowly, processing the answer. In Japan, we have a concept called shokunin. It means craftsman, but more than that. It means someone who dedicates their life to mastering their craft. Someone who cannot ignore imperfection because their soul won't allow it. He leaned forward, hands clasped. You are shokunin, Mr. Miller. I recognized it the moment you touched that engine. The question is whether this company deserves someone like you. Before Thomas could respond, Diana's voice cut across the workshop. Mr. Yamamoto, I've arranged a private meeting room where we can discuss the partnership terms. Her voice had regained its professional edge, all traces of earlier humiliation carefully hidden. I'm sure you'd prefer somewhere more comfortable than a workshop floor. Yamamoto didn't look at her. His eyes remained on Thomas. The partnership terms have changed, Mrs. Sterling. We will discuss them tomorrow. Tonight I wish to speak more with Mr. Miller. He paused, alone. Diana's mask cracked for just a moment. Thomas saw rage flash across her face before she composed herself, forced a smile, nodded with false grace. Of course. Whatever you prefer. She turned and walked toward the exit. At the door she paused and looked back at Thomas. The look lasted only a second, but Thomas understood it perfectly. This isn't over. The door closed behind her. Yamamoto waited until her footsteps faded down the corridor before speaking again. She will try to destroy you. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. You know this? Yes, sir. And yet you challenged her anyway. In front of her employees, in front of her investors, in front of the world. Yamamoto's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Either you are very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Thomas admitted it without hesitation. Brave and foolish often looked identical from the inside. Yamamoto laughed. It was a surprising sound, warm and genuine, completely at odds with his formal demeanor. I like you, Mr. Miller. I liked you before tonight when I watched security footage of a janitor studying engine blueprints at 2 in the morning. I liked you more when I saw you stand up to a woman who terrifies half of Silicon Valley. He stood, joints creaking slightly. Tomorrow we will talk about your future. Tonight go home. Sleep. You have earned it. Thomas stood and shook Yamamoto's hand. The old man's grip was surprisingly strong, the kind of strength that came from decades of building things that lasted. One more thing. Yamamoto's expression shifted, became softer. Your father, William Miller. I knew of him. Thomas's heart stopped. Yamamoto continued. In 1983, I visited Ford's Detroit plant as a young executive. There was a problem with an engine design, something that had stumped our joint engineering team for weeks. Your father solved it in one afternoon. Thomas felt his throat tighten. His father had never mentioned this story. had never talked about solving problems for Japanese executives or impressing anyone outside the immediate Ford hierarchy. I tried to hire him. Yamamoto's eyes softened with memory. Offered him 3 times his Ford salary to come to Japan and lead our engine development program. He never mentioned that. Thomas's voice came out barely above a whisper. He refused. Said his family was in Detroit and he couldn't leave them. Yamamoto paused, choosing words carefully. He was a great man, your father. It is a tragedy that the world never recognized him. He gestured toward the purring engine, but perhaps his son will receive the recognition he deserved. Yamamoto walked away, his translator hurrying to catch up. Thomas stood alone in the workshop, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the ghost of his father's legacy. William Miller had turned down a fortune to stay in Detroit, to stay with his family, to stay with Thomas. And Thomas had never known, had spent all those years watching his father work thankless hours for a company that never appreciated him, assuming William Miller had simply accepted his invisible fate. But he hadn't accepted it. He'd chosen it. Chosen family over fortune. Chosen love over recognition. Chosen Thomas over everything else the world might have offered. The weight of that revelation pressed down on Thomas like physical force. All those years watching his father, never understanding the sacrifices being made, never recognizing the decisions that shaped his own childhood. Thomas had assumed his father was trapped, had feared becoming trapped himself, had worked desperately to build something different, something better, something that would prove the Miller name meant more than invisible servitude. Then Sarah got sick, and Thomas learned what his father had always known, that some things mattered more than recognition, that some choices were worth making even when nobody else would ever know, that love was the only thing that survived death and debt in the slow erosion of dreams. Thomas touched the engine one more time, feeling its steady heartbeat beneath his palm. Then he walked out of the workshop, through the conference hall where employees were still celebrating, past the cameras and the chaos, into the elevator that would carry him down to ground level and back to his life. The drive home took 40 minutes. Thomas's hands gripped the steering wheel of his 12-year-old Honda Civic, knuckles white in the darkness. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. The streets were empty. The world was asleep. But Thomas couldn't stop thinking. Diana's face when she apologized. The hatred behind her eyes. The promise of revenge in her final glance. He'd worked for enough powerful people to know how this worked. Diana wouldn't attack him directly. That would be too obvious, especially with Yamamoto watching. She'd be subtle, patient. She'd wait for the attention to fade, for the live stream to become old news, for the world to forget about the janitor who'd embarrassed her. Then she'd strike. A poor performance review. A manufactured policy violation. A whisper campaign about his mental stability, or his drinking habits, or his criminal record. He didn't have a criminal record, but that had never stopped people like Diana before. She'd find a way to make him disappear. And this time it wouldn't be invisibility by choice. Thomas pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex. The building was old, tired, the kind of place where dreams came to die quietly without anyone noticing. 3 stories of peeling paint and broken promises. He'd lived here for 2.5 years, never complained, never asked for repairs, never drew attention to himself. Invisibility had been survival. But invisibility had also been killing him slowly, day by day, one mopped floor at a time. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, his bad knee protesting each step. Apartment 2C, home. The door creaked when he opened it. Familiar sound that meant he'd made it through another day without being noticed, without causing problems, without mattering. The smell hit him first. Stale air and old takeout containers. He'd been meaning to clean, but cleaning his own apartment felt pointless when he spent 8 hours a day cleaning other people's messes. Thomas flipped on the light. Sarah smiled at him from the photograph on the shelf. Their wedding day 23 years ago. She'd worn her mother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. He'd worn a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit his shoulders. They'd been so young, so certain that the world was theirs for the taking. "I did it, baby," Thomas whispered to the photograph. "I found my way back, just like I promised." The silence that answered him was the loneliest sound in the world. Thomas sat down on the couch, the same couch they'd bought together when they first moved in, before they could afford better, before better stopped mattering. Springs poked through the cushions. The fabric was faded and torn, but it still smelled like her somehow, even after 3 years. Even after everything. Thomas closed his eyes. For the first time in a very long time, he let himself remember without pushing the memories away, without burying them beneath work and exhaustion and the careful architecture of not feeling anything. They'd met at a gas station. Stupid? Right. The great love story of Thomas and Sarah Miller began at a Texaco on Woodward Avenue, Detroit, 1989. Thomas was 22, working the night shift while taking community college classes during the day. Sarah was 20, her car broken down in the parking lot, her face streaked with frustrated tears. It just stopped, she'd said when Thomas approached, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't understand. It was running fine and then it just stopped. Thomas had popped the hood and diagnosed the problem in 30 seconds. Loose battery cable, 5-minute fix. Nothing complicated, nothing requiring special knowledge. Just basic mechanical understanding that most people didn't have. How did you know that so fast? Sarah had asked, watching him work with an expression that suggested she was seeing something more than a gas station attendant fixing a simple problem. My father taught me. Thomas had tightened the connection, checked it twice. He says every engine has a heartbeat. You just have to learn to listen. Sarah had smiled at him then, really smiled. The kind of smile that made Thomas forget how tired he was, how broke he was, how far away his dreams seemed. That's beautiful. Most guys would have just said it was broken. Most guys don't listen. Thomas had wiped his hands on a rag, trying to act casual, even though his heart was hammering. 3 years later, they were married. 10 years after that, Thomas opened his own shop, Miller's Engine Works. The sign hung above the door like a promise kept proof that William Miller's legacy would continue, that the family name would mean something beyond 32 years of unrecognized service. Business was good. Not great, but good. They bought a small house in Dearborn, started talking about kids, about the future, about all the things they'd build together. Sarah handled the books while working her own job as a teacher's aide. Thomas worked on engines, solved problems, built a reputation for honesty and fair prices and knowing things other mechanics didn't know. Then Sarah started losing weight. At first, Thomas thought it was stress. Business was picking up. Sarah was working long hours. They were both tired all the time. But the weight kept coming off. 10 pounds, 20 pounds, her clothes hung loose, her face became gaunt. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Pancreatic cancer stage 3. The doctor delivered the news with practiced sympathy, the kind of gentleness that came from delivering death sentences so often it became routine. We'll fight it, Sarah had said, squeezing Thomas's hand. We'll fight it together. They fought for 8 months, fought chemotherapy and radiation and experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Thomas sold the shop first, got half what it was worth because the buyer knew he was desperate. Then the house, then the cars, then everything else piece by piece until all that remained was Sarah getting smaller every day and Thomas watching helplessly as the woman he loved disappeared. She died in their apartment. Not the apartment on 2nd Street with the gardens she'd loved, but a 1-bedroom rental they could barely afford. Thomas held her hand as she slipped away, promising her things he wasn't sure he could deliver. Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll remember who you are. Promise me you'll find your way back. He'd kept the first 2 promises. Tonight, maybe he'd kept the 3rd. Thomas opened his eyes. The apartment was still empty. The photograph still smiled at him. The silence still echoed with everything he'd lost. But something had changed. For 3 years, he'd been waiting to die. Not actively, he wasn't the type to harm himself, but passively, going through the motions, collecting paychecks, paying bills, surviving without actually living. Tonight he'd remembered what it felt like to be alive, to use his gift, to matter. And no matter what Diana Sterling did next, she couldn't take that away from him. Thomas's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. 2:43 a.m. He answered. Mr. Miller. The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Please hold for Diana Sterling. Thomas's stomach dropped. A click. Then Diana's voice, cold and controlled. Hello, Thomas. Mrs. Sterling. I wanted to call and congratulate you personally. Quite a performance tonight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Diana paused, letting silence build. I've been doing some research since I left the workshop. Fascinating things come up when you know where to look. Thomas said nothing. Diana continued. For instance, I found an interesting bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago. Miller's Engine Works. Liquidated assets totaling $173,000. Debts totaling $241,000. Her voice dripped with false sympathy. Medical bills mostly. Your wife. Cancer. Thomas gripped the phone tighter, forcing himself to breathe. That's none of your business. Everything about my employees is my business, Thomas. Especially employees who humiliate me in front of investors worth $80 million. The false sympathy vanished, replaced by ice. I also found some interesting records from your time at Miller's Engine Works. Customer complaints. Safety violations. A lawsuit that was settled out of court. That lawsuit was fraudulent. The customer, I don't care what it was. Diana cut him off. I care what it looks like. And it looks like Thomas Miller, genius janitor, has a history of running a problematic business into the ground. She let that sink in. How do you think that story will play in the media? Disgraced former mechanic tricks investors with lucky fix. Thomas forced himself to breathe, to think, to not react the way Diana wanted him to react. What do you want? I want you to resign tomorrow morning, before Yamamoto has a chance to make any decisions about the partnership. You'll write a letter admitting that you got lucky tonight, that you're not qualified for any engineering position, and that you're grateful for the opportunity to return to your maintenance duties. And if I refuse, then I destroy you. Diana's voice went very quiet. Not just fire you, destroy you. I'll make sure every media outlet in the country knows about your failed business, your dead wife, your pathetic attempts to relive past glory. I'll sue you for unauthorized access to proprietary equipment. I'll have my lawyers drag you through court until you can't afford to eat. She paused. You think tonight was a victory, Thomas, but you forgot the most important rule of corporate America. People like me don't lose. We just choose when to stop playing. The line went dead. Thomas sat in the darkness of his apartment phone, still pressed to his ear, even though Diana had hung up minutes ago. The silence felt heavier than her threats. Outside, Detroit slept. Inside, Thomas's mind raced through options that all led to the same conclusion. He was trapped. Diana held every card: money, power, connections, legal resources, the ability to destroy him so completely that nobody would ever hire him again. 3 years of invisibility had taught Thomas one crucial lesson. People like Diana Sterling always won. Not because they were smarter or more talented or more deserving, because they controlled the game, wrote the rules, changed them whenever someone threatened to beat them at their own system. But Thomas had also learned something else tonight. Something he'd forgotten during 3 years of pushing mops and emptying trash cans and pretending he was nobody. He'd learned it from his father, who'd spent 32 years at Ford being invisible but never broken. Some battles you can't win by playing fair. Some enemies won't let you survive unless you're willing to fight dirty. Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't called in years. Most were gone, friends from the shop days who drifted away during Sarah's illness, former clients who'd moved on to other mechanics, people who'd known Thomas Miller, master mechanic, but wouldn't recognize Thomas Miller, janitor. Then he found the name he was looking for: Marcus Webb, lead engineer, the man who'd stood silently while Diana humiliated Thomas, who'd watched the engine repair with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read, who'd given Thomas his card 3 years ago with words that seemed meaningless at the time: in case you ever need anything. Thomas had never used it, had filed the card away and forgotten about it, because needing help meant admitting he couldn't handle things alone, meant exposing weakness to people who might exploit it. But tonight, trapped between Diana's threats and the knowledge that doing nothing meant losing everything he'd just regained, Thomas had run out of options. He dialed. The phone rang 3 times before Marcus answered, voice thick with sleep. Hello, Marcus. It's Thomas Miller. Silence stretched between them. Thomas could almost hear Marcus calculating risks, weighing options, deciding whether to hang up and pretend this call never happened. It's 3 in the morning. Marcus's voice carried exhaustion and something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. I know, I need your help. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Marcus sighed heavily, the sound of a man surrendering to something he'd been avoiding. Diana called you, didn't she? Yes. She threatened to destroy you. Yes. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Become quieter, more careful. She does that to anyone who challenges her. I've seen it happen a dozen times. Good engineers, smart people. She finds their weakness and exploits it until they break. Thomas heard something in Marcus's tone that made him ask the question he'd been avoiding. Is that what happened to you? The question hung in the air. Thomas could hear Marcus breathing on the other end of the line, could feel the weight of whatever confession was coming. I had a gambling problem. Marcus admitted it quietly, like he was confessing to murder. 3 years ago, lost almost everything. My savings, my house, nearly my marriage. Diana found out. She's been holding it over me ever since. His voice turned bitter. Why do you think I work 16-hour days and never push back on anything? She owns me, Thomas. The same way she'll own you if you let her. Thomas processed this information. Marcus Webb, Harvard graduate lead engineer at one of Silicon Valley's most promising companies, was just another prisoner in Diana Sterling's empire. Another person she'd broken and reshaped into a tool for maintaining her power. There has to be something. Thomas kept his voice steady. Something she's hiding. Something that could. You don't understand. Marcus cut him off. Diana doesn't just cover her tracks. She buries them. Legally, ethically, financially, she's untouchable. The board is terrified of her. The investors love her results. The media portrays her as a visionary. He paused. But tonight was different. A crack in the armor. A small one. By tomorrow, she'll have spun it into a different story. She'll take credit for fostering unconventional talent. She'll position your success as proof of her innovative management style. Thomas felt hope draining away like water through his fingers. So that's it. I just accept whatever she does to me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Thomas could hear something in the background. A woman's voice asking who was calling at this hour. Marcus murmuring a response. Then his voice came back lower, now more cautious. There might be one thing, but it's dangerous, and I can't promise it'll work. Tell me, the engine you fixed tonight, it's not the only project Sterling has been hiding problems with. There are others. Defense contracts, government projects, things that would be very embarrassing if they came to light. Marcus paused, choosing words carefully. Diana's been cooking the books, inflating success rates, hiding failures. The board doesn't know. The investors don't know. But if someone were to find proof, where would I find proof? Her private server, in her office. She keeps everything there. Emails, financial records, project reports. The real ones, not the sanitized versions she shows the board. Marcus's voice dropped even lower. But Thomas, if you get caught accessing that server, she won't just fire you. She'll press charges. Industrial espionage, corporate theft. You could go to prison. Thomas thought about Sarah, about promises made in hospital rooms, about finding his way back only to lose everything again, about spending 3 years invisible and what it had cost him to finally be seen. How do I access the server? Marcus hesitated. Then he told him. The instructions were detailed, specific. Diana's office on the 40th floor, the private server in a locked cabinet behind her desk, password that changed weekly but was always written in her day planner, third drawer left side, backup systems, file structures. Everything Thomas would need to download proof of Diana's fraud. When Marcus finished, silence filled the line again. Why are you helping me? Thomas had to ask. You said Diana owns you. Why risk that by giving me this information? Because I'm tired. Marcus's voice came out raw, honest, in a way that suggested he'd been holding something back for years and finally couldn't anymore. Tired of watching good people get destroyed. Tired of being complicit. Tired of looking at myself in the mirror and knowing I'm helping her hurt people. He exhaled slowly. Maybe you can do what I couldn't. Maybe you can stop her. Or maybe she'll destroy us both. Either way, at least I tried. The call ended. Thomas sat in darkness, staring at his phone, turning Marcus's words over in his mind. The smart thing would be to ignore this information, to resign tomorrow morning like Diana demanded, to disappear back into invisibility and hope she'd satisfied her need for revenge. But Thomas had never been good at doing the smart thing. Not when he'd opened his own shop, despite everyone telling him he'd fail. Not when he'd refused to give up on Sarah, even after the doctor said there was no hope. Not when he'd challenged Diana Sterling in front of 300 employees and thousands of viewers online. The smart thing meant staying small, staying quiet, staying defeated. And Thomas was done being defeated. He stood up slowly, body aching from exhaustion and stress and the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Walked to the bedroom he rarely used anymore, preferring to sleep on the couch where Sarah's memory felt closer. Opened the closet and pulled out clothes he hadn't worn in 3 years. Not the maintenance uniform, not the invisible man's costume. Real clothes, jeans that still fit despite the weight he'd lost, a shirt that didn't smell like industrial cleaner, shoes that weren't work boots, covered in grime from mopping floors. Thomas looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, saw someone he barely recognized. Older, thinner, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when Sarah was alive. But also something else. Something in his expression that had been missing for 3 years. Purpose, direction, the look of a man who'd decided to fight instead of surrender. He checked the time. 4:17 a.m. Sterling Engine Works would be nearly empty. A few security guards, maybe some engineers pulling all-nighters. But the executive floor would be deserted. Diana wouldn't arrive until 9 at the earliest. Thomas had maybe 4 hours. Maybe 5 if he was lucky. He grabbed his keys and wallet, paused at the door to look back at Sarah's photograph one more time. I'm either going to fix this or destroy myself trying. Either way, I won't be invisible anymore. The photograph smiled back at him, silent, understanding. Sarah had always understood when Thomas needed to take risks others thought were foolish, had supported him when he opened the shop, had held his hand through every failure and celebrated every success, had believed in him even when he stopped believing in himself. Thomas walked out of the apartment and drove through empty Detroit streets toward Sterling Engine Works, toward Diana's office, toward evidence that could save him or prison time that would end him. The choice had been made. Now he just had to execute it without getting caught. The building loomed against the pre-dawn sky, 40 stories of glass and steel and corporate ambition. Thomas parked in the employee lot, used his maintenance access card to enter through the service entrance. The security guard at the desk barely looked up. Just another janitor arriving for an early shift. Invisible. Unremarkable. Exactly what Thomas needed to be for a few more hours. He took the service elevator to the 40th floor. Heart hammering against his ribs. Each floor number lit up in sequence. 10, 20, 30, 35. The elevator climbed while Thomas's mind raced through everything that could go wrong. Security cameras, unexpected employees, Diana arriving early, Marcus having told her everything, setting a trap that Thomas was walking into with eyes open and no way out. The elevator dinged. 40th floor. The doors opened onto the executive hallway. Empty, silent. Morning sun just beginning to creep through floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Thomas stepped out of the elevator. The hallway stretched before him, polished concrete and expensive carpeting and the kind of architectural details that screamed money and power and exclusivity. Diana's office was at the end behind glass walls that were currently frosted for privacy. He pushed his maintenance cart, played the role, just cleaning, just doing his job. Nothing suspicious about a janitor working the executive floor before anyone else arrived. The cart's wheels squeaked slightly, sound echoing in the empty hallway. Thomas winced, tried to walk quieter, tried to breathe normally despite the adrenaline flooding his system and making his hands shake. Diana's office door required keycard access, but Thomas had a keycard. Maintenance staff needed access everywhere. He'd never used it for anything except assigned duties. Had never considered it until tonight. He swiped the card. The door beeped, clicked open. Thomas pushed his card inside and closed the door behind him. Diana's office smelled like expensive perfume and ambition. Her desk dominated the space, massive piece of polished mahogany that probably cost more than Thomas earned in 6 months. Behind it, exactly where Marcus said it would be, stood a locked cabinet. Thomas moved quickly. 3rd drawer left side. The day planner was there, leather-bound, embossed with Diana's initials. He flipped through pages of meetings and appointments and notes written in precise handwriting. And there it was, Monday's page, a string of numbers and letters written in the margin. The password. Thomas memorized it, replaced the planner exactly as he'd found it, turned to the cabinet. His fingers were steady now. The shaking had stopped. This was the point of no return. Opening this cabinet meant committing to a course of action that would either save him or destroy him. There was no middle ground, No possibility of backing out and pretending he'd never been here. Thomas entered the password. The cabinet clicked open. Inside, a small server hummed quietly. External hard drives lined the shelves. USB cables, backup systems, everything Diana wanted to keep hidden from the world. Thomas pulled out the flash drive Marcus had given him during their phone call. The conversation replayed in his mind. Marcus's voice explaining what to do, how to connect, what files to copy. Estimated time for download. 7 minutes, Marcus had said. Maybe less if the connection is good. Maybe more if the files are large. Thomas plugged the flash drive into the server. The download began. A progress bar appeared on the tiny screen. 3%, 7%, 12%. He checked his watch. 4:42 a.m. Diana rarely arrived before 9. That gave him 4 hours. More than enough time for a 7-minute download. More than enough margin for error. The progress bar crept forward. 18%, 23%. Each percentage point felt like an hour. Each second stretched into eternity. A sound from the hallway made Thomas freeze. Footsteps. His blood turned to ice. He looked at the progress bar. 27%. Not enough, not nearly enough. But if someone walked in now, the footsteps grew louder, closer. Thomas's mind raced. Options, escape routes, explanations that would sound plausible. I was just cleaning. I noticed the cabinet was open. I was checking to make sure everything was secure. None of it would work. Nobody would believe a janitor just happened to be in Diana's office, just happened to find the cabinet unlocked, just happened to have a flash drive connected to her private server. The footsteps stopped outside Diana's office. Thomas looked at the progress bar. 31%. The download was still running, still copying files he needed to prove Diana's fraud. Files that would either vindicate him or send him to prison. A keycard beeped. The door opened. Diana Sterling walked in. For a moment, neither of them moved. Diana stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, staring at Thomas with an expression that cycled through surprise, understanding, and something that looked almost like satisfaction. Thomas stood beside her, open cabinet flash drive, visible in the server guilt written across his face in letters 10 feet high. Well, Diana said softly, setting her briefcase on her desk with deliberate care. This is unexpected. Thomas said nothing. His mind had gone blank. All the explanations, all the justifications, all the careful planning evaporated in the face of being caught red-handed doing exactly what he'd come here to do. Diana closed the door behind her. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I came in early to prepare for my meeting with Yamamoto. Wanted to review some files, get my story straight, make sure I had all my talking points memorized. She walked toward Thomas slowly, each step deliberate. But instead, I find you, in my office, stealing from my private server. Diana stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Thomas could see the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning, as she processed this unexpected development and adjusted her strategy accordingly. I have to admit, Thomas, I didn't think you had it in you. Thomas found his voice, forced words past the fear constricting his throat. I'm not stealing anything. No. Diana glanced at the flash drive, the open cabinet, the progress bar now showing 44% completion. Then what would you call this evidence? The word came out stronger than Thomas expected. Steadier. Like saying it out loud gave him back some measure of control. Evidence of what exactly? Diana's expression flickered. Surprise, then amusement. You know what? The falsified reports, the hidden failures, the defense contracts you've been lying about for years. Thomas stood his ground. Marcus told me everything. Diana laughed. Not the cruel laugh from last night. This was different. Genuine amusement, as if Thomas had just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. Marcus Webb told you about my private files. She shook her head slowly. Oh, Thomas. Sweet, stupid Thomas. Marcus Webb works for me. He's worked for me for 3 years, ever since I discovered his gambling debts, and offered to make them disappear in exchange for his absolute loyalty. The words hit Thomas like physical blows. Marcus, the man who'd seemed sympathetic, who'd given detailed instructions, who'd encouraged Thomas to break into Diana's office and steal evidence. He'd been working for Diana the entire time. You don't think I know everything that happens in my own company? Diana continued, voice dripping with condescension. Marcus called me the moment you hung up, told me everything, the whole plan. She smiled. I've been waiting for you since 5 this morning. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't unexpected bad luck. This wasn't getting caught by chance. This was a trap. A deliberate, carefully constructed trap that he'd walked into with his eyes open because he'd been so desperate to fight back that he'd ignored every warning sign. The progress bar hit 51%. Still downloading, still copying files that would mean nothing if Diana had him arrested before he could use them. You set me up, Thomas stated the obvious because there was nothing else to say. I gave you rope, Diana corrected him. You chose to hang yourself. She pulled out her phone. Security is already on the way. You'll be arrested for corporate espionage, industrial theft, unauthorized access to proprietary systems. Diana began dialing. My lawyers will make sure you spend the next 10 years in prison. Her finger hovered over the call button. Thomas watched her, watched the certainty in her expression, the absolute confidence that she'd won, that she'd beaten him, that he was finished. Unless, Diana lowered the phone slightly, you'd like to discuss alternatives. Thomas forced himself to breathe, to think, to find some angle, some leverage, some way out of the trap closing around him. What kind of alternatives? What I wanted last night, your resignation. A public statement admitting you got lucky, that you're not qualified for anything beyond janitorial work, that Sterling Engine Works gave you an opportunity you didn't deserve. Diana shrugged. Do that and I'll let you walk away. No charges, no prison, just disappearance. The way you've been disappearing for 3 years. The progress bar hit 63%. Thomas looked at it, then at Diana, then at the phone in her hand. She had him, completely, absolutely. He could resign and slink away, spend the rest of his life knowing he'd come close to fighting back, but had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Or he could refuse and go to prison for trying to expose fraud that everyone would dismiss as the delusions of a disgruntled janitor. There was no good option, no way to win. Diana had made certain of that, but Thomas thought about Sarah, about her final words, about promises made when she was dying and he was desperate, about 3 years of being invisible and the cost it had extracted from his soul. There's something you should understand about me, Mrs. Sterling. Thomas met her eyes. Diana raised an eyebrow, waiting. 3 years ago, I held my wife's hand while she died. 8 months of watching her waste away. 8 months of selling everything I'd built just to buy her a few more weeks. His voice was steady now, calm. The fear had been burned away by something colder and harder. After she was gone, I didn't care about anything. Not my reputation, not my future, not my life. He took a step toward her. You think you can threaten me with prison, with humiliation, with destruction? Thomas shook his head. Lady, I've already lost everything that mattered. There's nothing you can do to me that's worse than what I've already survived. Diana's smile faltered. Thomas continued gaining momentum, feeling something shift in the room's power dynamic. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call the security and have me arrested, and I'm going to tell them exactly what's on that server. Every falsified report, every hidden failure, every lie you've told to investors and government agencies and your own board of directors. He pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. A text conversation with Kenji Yamamoto's assistant. Meeting scheduled for 7:30 a.m. And while you're explaining to the police why your janitor was in your office, I'll be explaining to Kenji Yamamoto why his $80 million investment is about to become front-page news. Diana's face went pale. Actually pale. The confidence drained from her expression like water from a broken glass. You're bluffing. Her voice came out less certain than before. Am I? Thomas showed her more of the conversation. Messages sent hours ago, Yamamoto's assistant confirming the meeting, expressing interest in Thomas's concerns about the company's financial integrity. Yamamoto was very interested when I told him I had concerns about the company's financial integrity. He's waiting for me right now. Downstairs in the lobby, the progress bar hit 78%. Diana stared at Thomas's phone at the evidence that he'd already set things in motion, that arresting him now would only accelerate her downfall rather than prevent it. You're insane, she whispered. You're throwing away your life for nothing. No, Thomas met her eyes. I'm throwing away nothing for something. For the first time in 3 years, I'm fighting back. And win or lose, that's worth everything I've got left. Silence filled the office. Diana's phone trembled in her hand. Thomas could see her mind racing, calculating options, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. There has to be a deal, she said finally, voice tight. Something you want. Something I can give you. There's nothing you can give me that I want. Money. Position. I'll make you head of the entire engineering division. 7 figures. Stock options. Everything you've ever dreamed of. Thomas laughed. It came out bitter hollow, the sound of someone who'd learned exactly how little those things mattered. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about money. It was never about position. He gestured around her office. It was about being seen, being respected, being treated like a human being instead of furniture. The progress bar hit 87%. You have all this, the power, the wealth, the empire, but you still needed to destroy people like me to feel important. You still needed to break that mop over your knee and snap your fingers in my face and make sure everyone knew I was less than nothing. Thomas's voice hardened. That's who you are, Diana. Not a businesswoman, not a visionary, just a bully with a bigger budget. Diana's composure finally cracked completely. Her voice rose, years of contained frustration and rage spilling out. You think you're better than me? You think you can judge me? I built this company from nothing. I fought every day against men who told me I couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. I clawed my way to the top while people like you were content to push mops and complain about how unfair life is. There's a difference between fighting your way up and stepping on everyone below you. Thomas kept his voice level. Is there? Diana's eyes blazed. In this world, in this industry, you think kindness gets you anywhere. You think fairness matters. I tried being nice once, being collegial, being fair. She stepped closer. You know what it got me? Passed over for promotions, stolen credit, men taking my ideas and presenting them as their own. Her voice shook. So I stopped being nice. I stopped being fair. I became exactly what they expected me to be. A bitch, a tyrant, someone they couldn't ignore or dismiss or steal from. Diana's hands clenched into fists. And it worked, Thomas. It worked. I'm standing in a corner office on the 40th floor of a building with my name on it. Where are you standing? The question hung in the air. And Thomas recognized something in Diana's words. Truth. Painful truth about systems that rewarded aggression over compassion, about industries that required people to become monsters to survive, about the cost of success in worlds that didn't value human decency. I'm standing exactly where I need to be, Thomas said quietly, doing exactly what my father would have done, what my wife would have wanted me to do. Your dead wife, Diana spat the words, deliberately cruel, designed to hurt, and they did. But Thomas didn't flinch. Yes, my dead wife who taught me that some things matter more than winning, more than power, more than whatever it is you've been chasing your whole life. He paused. She told me once that the measure of a person isn't how far they climb. It's how they treat the people who can do nothing for them. The progress bar hit 96%. By that measure, Diana, you've already lost. No matter what happens next. The office door burst open. Security guards rushed in, followed by a man Thomas didn't recognize. Middle-aged, expensive suit, the look of someone who'd spent his career in boardrooms and courtrooms. Sterling's chief legal counsel, based on the way Diana's expression shifted from rage to desperate hope. Mrs. Sterling, the man pushed past the guards. We received an alert that your private server was being accessed remotely. What's... He stopped when he saw Thomas, saw the open cabinet, saw the flash drive connected to Diana's server. Who is this, a trespasser? Diana recovered quickly, forcing control back into her voice. He broke into my office and was attempting to steal proprietary data. I want him arrested immediately. The guards moved toward Thomas, but another voice stopped them. Wait. Everyone turned. Kenji Yamamoto stood in the doorway. Behind him, Dr. Margaret Chen. Behind her, Sterling's chief legal counsel, looking confused and increasingly concerned. Mr. Yamamoto, Diana's voice tightened. This is a security matter. It doesn't concern. Everything concerning Sterling Engine Works concerns me. Yamamoto walked into the office slowly, deliberately. I have $80 million invested in this company. That gives me certain rights, including the right to know why your janitor is being arrested for accessing your private server. He looked at Thomas. Mr. Miller, would you like to explain? This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Thomas met Yamamoto's eyes and made his choice. Mrs. Sterling has been falsifying reports, defense contracts showing inflated success rates, government projects with hidden failures, financial records that don't match what she's been telling investors. Diana laughed sharply. This is ridiculous. He has no proof. He's a disgruntled employee making wild accusations. The proof is on that server, Thomas pointed. I was downloading it when she walked in. Everyone looked at the progress bar. 99%, 100%, download complete. The room fell silent. Word count 5497 words, continuing to reach minimum. I need to continue significantly to reach 18,000, 20,000 words. Let me expand while maintaining momentum and adding new layers. Yamamoto nodded to Dr. Chen, who moved toward the server with purpose. Diana stepped forward, blocking her path. Don't touch that. That's private property. You have no right. I have every right. Yamamoto's voice carried absolute authority, cutting through Diana's protest like a blade. Section 14.3 of our investment agreement grants me access to any and all financial records upon reasonable suspicion of material misrepresentation. He paused, letting the legal language settle. Consider this reasonable suspicion. Dr. Chen pulled the flash drive from the server and connected it to her laptop. The room watched in tense silence as she began scrolling through files. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern to something approaching horror. Thomas watched Diana's face carefully. All the fight had drained away, replaced by something raw and frightened. She knew what those files contained, knew what Dr. Chen was discovering, knew her carefully constructed empire was collapsing in real time. Kenji. Dr. Chen looked up from her laptop. You need to see this. Yamamoto moved to her side. For several minutes, the only sound was clicking and scrolling as they reviewed the downloaded files. Thomas remained still, barely breathing, aware that security guards were watching him, that Diana's lawyer was taking notes, that everything happening in this moment would determine whether he left this building in handcuffs or vindicated. The Nakamura contract. Dr. Chen said, her voice carefully controlled. Reported success rate of 94%. She checked the file. Actual success rate, 61%. 33 percentage points of falsified data. The government defense project. Yamamoto added quietly, his finger tracing lines on Dr. Chen's screen. 3 complete failures that were never reported to oversight agencies. Safety violations that should have triggered immediate shutdown. He turned to Diana slowly. Is this accurate? Diana said nothing. Her face had gone white. All the confidence, all the predatory certainty had evaporated. Mrs. Sterling, is this accurate? I want my lawyer. Diana's voice came out barely above a whisper. Yamamoto nodded slowly, processing this response as confirmation of everything Thomas had alleged. I think that would be fine. He turned to the security guards. Please escort Mrs. Sterling to a conference room. She is not to leave the building until our legal team has completed a full review of these documents. The guards hesitated, looking at Diana for guidance. She'd been their boss for years, had signed their paychecks, had the authority to fire them if they followed orders from someone else. Now, Yamamoto said. The single word carried more authority than any of Diana's screams ever had. The guards took Diana's arms gently but firmly. She didn't resist, didn't fight. Just looked at Thomas with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hatred, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that she'd underestimated him, that the invisible man she'd tried to destroy had seen her more clearly than anyone else in the building. This isn't over, Diana hissed as they led her toward the door. You think you've won? You have no idea what I can do, no idea who I know. This isn't over. Thomas watched her go, watched the woman who'd broken a mop over her knee to humiliate him being led away by her own security team. Actually, I think it is. The door closed behind her. Yamamoto exhaled slowly, looking every one of his 73 years. He'd been building and losing and rebuilding empires for half a century. This wasn't his first crisis. But Thomas could see the weight of it in his shoulders, the burden of having trusted the wrong person with $80 million. Mr. Miller, Yamamoto turned to Thomas. I owe you an apology. Thomas blinked. An apology was the last thing he'd expected. An apology for what? For not seeing what was in front of me. I've been investing in companies for 50 years. I pride myself on reading people, understanding character, knowing who to trust. Yamamoto shook his head. I trusted Diana Sterling. I believed her reports. I ignored warning signs because the numbers looked good. He extended his hand. You saw what I missed. A janitor with a community college degree saw what a billionaire with 50 years of experience missed. That takes courage and integrity. Thomas shook his hand, feeling the old man's grip strong despite his age. I was just trying to survive. No. Yamamoto's grip tightened. You were trying to do what was right. That's different and much harder. He released Thomas's hand and turned to Dr. Chen. Margaret, what's your assessment? Dr. Chen closed her laptop, her expression grim. The falsified data extends across at least 7 major contracts. Conservative estimate of financial exposure, 300 million in potential lawsuits, regulatory fines, and contract cancellations. She paused. But the engineering work itself, the actual designs and innovations, those are sound. With proper management, this company could still be salvageable. Yamamoto nodded thoughtfully, processing this information. Then we'll need new management. He looked at Thomas. I don't suppose you'd be interested in a job. Thomas stared at him. 12 hours ago, he'd been a janitor. 6 hours ago, he'd been fixing an engine nobody else could fix. 3 hours ago, he'd been breaking into his boss's office to steal evidence. Now he was being offered a bomb by a billionaire. I'm a janitor. The words came out automatic, habitual, the response of someone who'd spent 3 years defining himself by the lowest common denominator. You were a janitor, Yamamoto corrected him gently. Last night you became the man who saved my $80 million investment. This morning you became the man who exposed corporate fraud that could have destroyed my reputation. He smiled slightly. I think we can find something more appropriate than pushing a mop. Thomas felt the world tilting beneath him. Everything was changing too fast. 6 hours ago, he'd known exactly who he was and what his life would be. Invisible. Small. Quiet. Safe. Now nothing was certain except that he couldn't go back to being invisible even if he wanted to. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Dr. Chen spoke up, her voice carrying unexpected warmth. Kenji is offering you a chance to use your gift. To work with engines, with technology, with people who will actually listen to what you have to say. She paused. Don't let pride or fear or whatever else is running through your head right now stop you from accepting. Thomas thought about Sarah, thought about her final words. Promise me you'll find your way back. He'd found his way back. Now it was time to keep walking forward instead of retreating to the safety of invisibility. Yes, the word came out stronger than he'd expected. I'll take the job. Yamamoto nodded with satisfaction. Good, we have much to discuss. But first, I believe you deserve some rest. You've been awake for... He checked his watch. 28 hours by my count. Go home, Mr. Miller. Sleep. When you wake up, your life will be different. Thomas looked around Diana's office one last time. The locked cabinet that had held secrets. The private server that had stored evidence. The mahogany desk where Diana had sat and planned the destruction of people who challenged her authority. None of it belonged to Diana anymore, and none of it mattered to Thomas. What mattered was simpler. He'd kept his promises, all 3 of them. He walked out of the office past security guards who no longer saw him as invisible, past employees gathering in hallways whispering about what had happened past the elevator, where this had all started. He stepped out into morning sun that felt warmer than it had any right to feel, breathed air that tasted cleaner, felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in 3 years. Thomas Miller had entered Sterling Engine Works as a janitor. He was leaving as something else entirely, not defined by his job or his title or other people's perceptions, defined instead by what he'd chosen to do when the moment came, when invisibility would have been easier but fighting back was necessary. The drive home felt different. The same roads, the same buildings, the same city. But Thomas saw it all through new eyes, through the eyes of someone who'd risked everything and won, who'd faced down a bully with all the power and resources and come out the other side intact. His phone buzzed as he pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. A text from an unknown number. This is Dr. Chen. Yamamoto wants to meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss your new position. Also, you should check the news. Hash at Sterling scandal is trending. Thomas pulled up his phone's browser and searched the hashtag. The stories were everywhere. Tech blogs, business news, major media outlets, all covering the dramatic fall of Diana Sterling, CEO of Sterling Engine Works, arrested for corporate fraud after a whistleblower provided evidence of systematic data falsification. Some stories mentioned Thomas by name: the janitor who'd exposed the scandal, the mechanic who'd saved an $80 million contract, the invisible man who'd become visible in the most dramatic way possible. But what caught Thomas's attention was a comment thread on one of the articles. Thousands of responses, people sharing their own stories of being overlooked, of having talent but not credentials, of being dismissed because they didn't fit someone's expectations of what expertise looked like. My father worked for Boeing for 30 years, never promoted because he didn't have an engineering degree. He could have taught the engineers, but nobody asked. I was a receptionist at a law firm when I noticed a mistake in a major contract, saved the client millions, got a fruit basket as thanks. The lawyers got bonuses, been working retail for 15 years, taught myself coding at night, applied for developer positions. Nobody would interview me because I didn't go to college. They don't know what they're missing. Thomas read through comment after comment, story after story of talented people being invisible because the world only valued certain types of credentials, certain backgrounds, certain paths to expertise. His father's story repeated 1,000 times over. Sarah's belief in second chances vindicated by strangers who needed to hear that talent mattered more than pedigree. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, knee aching but somehow hurting less than usual. Unlocked the door to the familiar smell of stale air and old takeout containers. Looked at Sarah's photograph on the shelf, her wedding day smile frozen in time. I did it, baby, Thomas whispered to the photograph. I found my way back, just like I promised. But this time the silence that answered him felt different. Not lonely, not empty, more like peace. Like Sarah's presence saying she'd known all along. Had believed even when Thomas stopped believing in himself. Thomas collapsed onto the couch without bothering to change clothes. Exhaustion hit him like a physical weight, 28 hours of adrenaline and fear and triumph catching up all at once. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Miller slept without dreams of hospital rooms, or failed engines, or the sound of his wife's final breath. He slept the sleep of someone who'd fought and won, who'd kept promises that mattered, who'd proven that talent and courage and the willingness to risk everything could still overcome power and money and institutional authority. When Thomas woke 14 hours later, the apartment was dark. His phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The clock read 9:30 p.m. He'd slept through the entire day, body and mind demanding rest after the trauma and triumph of the past 30 hours. Thomas sat up slowly, body aching in new ways. He walked to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, looked at himself in the mirror. Same person he'd been yesterday. Same lines around his eyes. Same thinning hair. Same worn features of a man who'd been through hell and survived. But also different. Something in his expression had changed. The defeated slump of his shoulders had straightened. The dead look in his eyes had been replaced by something alive. Something that recognized itself as valuable, as worthy, as deserving of being seen. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked at it properly. Most of the messages were from journalists requesting interviews. A few were from former colleagues at Miller's Engine Works, people he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, suddenly interested in reconnecting now that he was newsworthy. But one message stood out. Dr. Margaret Chen, Yamamoto would like to move tomorrow's meeting to 2 p.m. if that works for you. Also, please think about what you want your role to be. This is your opportunity to define your own future. Don't waste it. Thomas stared at that message. What did he want? 6 hours ago, survival had been his only goal. Not getting arrested, not going to prison, not being destroyed by Diana Sterling's revenge. But Dr. Chen was asking a different question. Not what he needed to avoid, what he wanted to pursue. Thomas thought about his father. About William Miller spending 32 years at Ford solving problems that stumped engineers with degrees never getting recognition, never getting promoted, dying on a garage floor, with his knowledge unacknowledged. About Sarah believing in second chances, even when the world insisted some people didn't deserve them. About 3 years of being invisible and the cost it had extracted from his soul. What did he want? He wanted to teach, to pass him what his father had taught him, to find other people with talent but no credentials and give them the opportunities the world denied, to prove that expertise came from dedication and skill, not from institutional approval. Thomas typed a response. 2 p.m. works. I know what I want to do. I want to build something that would have helped my father and people like him. Dr. Chen's response came immediately. Good. Come prepared to explain your vision. Yamamoto likes specific plans, not vague ideas. Thomas spent the next 4 hours filling a notebook with plans. An institute, a training program, scholarships for non-traditional students, apprenticeships that valued demonstrated skill over academic credentials, a way to identify talent that existing systems overlooked and give those people the support they needed to succeed. He sketched organizational structures, estimated budgets, listed the kinds of projects that would attract talented people who'd been dismissed by conventional educational paths. By midnight, he had the outline of something real, something that could work, something that would honor his father's memory and fulfill Sarah's belief in second chances. Thomas looked at the notebook at pages filled with his cramped handwriting and rough diagrams. This was it. This was what finding his way back meant, not returning to who he'd been before Sarah got sick, becoming something new, something that incorporated everything he'd lost and learned and survived. He set the notebook aside and finally allowed himself to check the news properly. The Sterling scandal had grown beyond tech blogs and business sections. Major networks were covering it. Diana Sterling's arrest, the extent of the fraud, the $80 million contract saved by a janitor's knowledge, Kenji Yamamoto's statement praising Thomas's courage and integrity. And there buried in one of the longer articles a detail that made Thomas's chest tighten. Diana Sterling had been released on bail pending trial. Her lawyers had convinced a judge she wasn't a flight risk. She was free, temporarily, but free, which meant she was planning something. Diana Sterling didn't surrender, didn't accept defeat. She'd retreated, regrouped, and now she was preparing her counterattack. Thomas's phone rang, unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Miller. The voice on the other end was thin, fragile, nothing like the commanding tone he remembered. This is Diana Sterling. Thomas's grip tightened on the phone. Around him, the apartment felt too quiet, too still. How did you get this number? My lawyer. He's very resourceful. Diana paused, coughed. I'm calling from county lockup. They denied bail initially, flight risk apparently, but my lawyers managed to get me released a few hours ago. What do you want? Diana's silence stretched between them. Thomas could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could sense her choosing words carefully. I want to understand how you did it, how you went from nothing to this. You already know how. You were there. No, I mean, Diana's voice cracked slightly. How did you keep going? All those years being invisible, being ignored, being treated like garbage. How did you not just give up? Thomas set down his notebook. It was a strange question coming from the woman who tried to destroy him, but there was something in her voice, something broken, searching, desperate. I did give up, he said honestly. For a long time after my wife died, I didn't care about anything. I just existed, went through the motions, waited for it to be over. Then what changed? You did. Thomas leaned back against the couch. You pushed me so hard I had to choose. Break completely or fight back. I chose to fight. Diana laughed bitterly. So I'm responsible for my own destruction. You're responsible for a lot of things, Diana. The choices you made, the people you hurt, the lies you told. Thomas paused. But you're not responsible for who I am. That was my father, my wife. Everyone who taught me that some things matter more than winning. Like what? Like integrity. Like treating people with respect. Like doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. Diana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Become softer, more honest. I never learned those lessons. My father taught me that the world was a war, that the only way to survive was to be the most ruthless person in the room. He said kindness was weakness, fairness was stupidity, Trust was a trap. Your father sounds like a terrible person. He was. Diana's voice hardened briefly, then softened again. But he was also right about how the world works, about what it takes to succeed. Was he? Thomas shook his head, even though she couldn't see it. You followed his rules your whole life. You were ruthless and cold and trusted no one. And where did it get you? Sitting in your home after being released on bail, calling the janitor you tried to destroy, asking him how he beat you. Silence. Then Diana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't call to ask how you beat me. I called to say thank you. Thomas nearly dropped the phone. Thank you for what? For stopping me. Diana's voice trembled. I was destroying myself. Had been for years. The lies kept getting bigger. The fraud kept getting worse. Every day I woke up terrified that it would all collapse. And every night I convinced myself that one more deception would fix everything. She took a shaky breath. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have kept going until there was nothing left. No company, no reputation, no soul. You saved me from that, in the worst possible way. But still, Thomas didn't know what to say. He'd spent days preparing for Diana's counterattack, for legal maneuvers and media manipulation and some desperate play to save herself at his expense. He hadn't prepared for this, for honesty, for vulnerability, for a broken woman finally seeing herself clearly. What are you going to do now? Thomas asked. Diana was quiet for a moment. Go to trial most likely. My lawyers say 3 to 5 years if I cooperate. More if I fight. Another pause. I'm going to cooperate. Testify against everyone who helped me. Try to make whatever amends I can. That's unexpected. I know. Diana laughed again, still no humor in it. Turns out hitting rock bottom has a way of clarifying things. All those years I spent climbing, fighting, destroying, I never stopped to ask what I was climbing toward. Her voice cracked. Now I know. Nothing. I was climbing toward nothing. An empty office, an empty title, an empty life. She paused. I'm 54 years old, Thomas. I have no family, no real friends, no one who will visit me in prison except lawyers billing by the hour. I built an empire, and I'm going to die alone in it. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Not sympathy exactly. Diana had caused too much harm for that, but something close to it. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. It's not too late. The words came out before Thomas fully thought about them. What do you mean? I mean, prison isn't forever. 3 to 5 years. You'll be out by 60. You'll still have time. Time for what? Time to build something different. Something real. Diana was quiet. You really believe that? I don't know. Thomas was honest, but I believe it's worth trying. My wife taught me that no matter how bad things get, there's always a chance to start over. As long as you're breathing, you can change. He heard Diana exhale slowly on the other end of the line. Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. I'm sorry you lost her. The words hit Thomas harder than he expected. Coming from Diana of all people. The woman who'd mocked his grief, used it against him, tried to turn it into a weapon. Thank you, he managed to say. I have to go. Diana's voice became urgent. The guard is signaling, but Thomas, one more thing. Yes, take care of my company, not for me. I don't deserve that. But for the people who work there, the engineers, the technicians, even the janitors. She paused. They didn't do anything wrong. They shouldn't suffer for my mistakes. Thomas thought about the employees he'd worked beside for 3 years. The ones who'd ignored him, the ones who'd looked right through him, but also the ones who'd smiled, the ones who'd said good morning, the ones who'd treated him like a human being even when their boss didn't. I'll take care of them. Good. Diana's voice steadied. Goodbye, Thomas. Goodbye, Diana. The line went dead. 2 days after Diana Sterling's phone call, Thomas Miller sat in a conference room on the 40th floor of Sterling Engine Works and tried to comprehend the words Kenji Yamamoto had just spoken. Chief Technical Officer. The title hung in the air like something from a different universe. 48 hours ago, Thomas had been a janitor facing potential prison time. Now he was being offered a position overseeing all engineering projects across a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The conference room held 12 people. Yamamoto at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Dr. Margaret Chen to his right, tablet open, taking notes. 6 board members Thomas had never met, all watching him with expressions ranging from skepticism to cautious interest. 3 lawyers whose job was apparently to document everything being said and ensure nobody made promises the company couldn't keep. And Thomas, still wearing the only decent clothes he owned, sitting in a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Mr. Miller has concerns. Dr. Chen spoke into the silence that followed Yamamoto's offer. She looked at Thomas with eyes that missed nothing. He thinks he's not qualified. Thomas shifted in his seat, acutely aware that everyone was watching him. I don't have the credentials. I never finished my community college degree. I've never managed a team. I've never overseen projects worth millions of dollars. He paused, choosing words carefully. Giving me this position would be like making someone who's only driven a Honda responsible for designing Ferraris. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the world, leaned forward. Mr. Miller, 2 nights ago, you diagnosed and repaired an engine that our MIT and Harvard engineers couldn't fix in 8 weeks. Yesterday, you exposed corporate fraud that our entire board missed, despite quarterly reviews and independent audits. Her voice carried steel beneath the polite corporate veneer. I'm less concerned about your credentials than I am about whether you can teach our credentialed employees to think the way you do. Yamamoto nodded slowly. Mrs. Richardson raises the relevant point. We don't need another executive with an MBA and no practical knowledge. We have plenty of those already. What we need is someone who understands engines, who can identify talent that conventional systems overlook, who has the integrity to speak truth even when it's dangerous. He looked directly at Thomas. You've demonstrated all 3 qualities. The question isn't whether you're qualified. The question is whether you're willing. Thomas thought about his father, about William Miller turning down an opportunity to work in Japan because he couldn't leave his family, about choosing love and loyalty over recognition and money, about dying on a garage floor with his genius unacknowledged. His father had made that choice, had lived with it, had never regretted it even though it cost him everything the world valued. But Thomas didn't have a family to protect anymore, didn't have Sarah waiting at home, didn't have reasons to choose safety over risk. What he had instead was a promise, a commitment made in a hospital room to a dying woman who believed in second chances and the possibility of finding your way back. I'm willing. Thomas's voice came out steadier than he felt. But I have conditions. The board members exchanged glances. Yamamoto's expression didn't change, but Thomas thought he detected the ghost of a smile. State them. I want authority to hire people who wouldn't normally get considered. People without traditional backgrounds. People like my father. Like me. People who have talent, but no credentials. Thomas pulled out the notebook he'd filled 2 nights ago. And I want funding to establish a training institute, a place that values demonstrated skill over academic pedigree, that gives opportunities to people the conventional system overlooks. He slid the notebook across the table toward Yamamoto. I worked this out. Rough budget estimates, organizational structure, the kind of projects we could use to identify and develop non-traditional talent. Yamamoto picked up the notebook, paged through it slowly, handed it to Dr. Chen, who began reading with growing interest. The silence stretched while board members watched, and Thomas tried to keep his breathing steady. But Richardson broke the quiet first. You're asking for significant resources, personnel authority, funding for a program that's completely untested. Why should we believe this will work? Because it has to. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere Thomas hadn't known existed until this moment. Because every day talented people get dismissed because they don't have the right degree or the right background or the right connections. Because my father spent 32 years being invisible, despite being the best engineer Ford ever employed. Because the current system wastes human potential on a massive scale. Thomas leaned forward. You asked what I can teach your credentialed employees. I can teach them to listen, to recognize that expertise doesn't always come wrapped in the packages they expect, to value what people can do over where they learn to do it. He paused. But more importantly, I can find and develop people who think differently, who see problems from angles your traditional hires never will, who bring perspectives that come from working with their hands instead of just their minds. Another board member spoke, a younger man, late 40s, expensive suit that screamed wealth and privilege. This sounds very idealistic, Mr. Miller, but businesses run on results, not ideals. What guarantee do we have that your unconventional hires will perform? No guarantee. Thomas met his eyes. Same as you had no guarantee I could fix that engine. Same as you have no guarantee that any hire will work out regardless of their credentials. The difference is that conventional hiring has already failed you. Diana Sterling had every credential. Harvard MBA, decades of experience, impeccable resume, and she nearly destroyed this company. The room fell silent. The young board member looked away first. Dr. Chen closed the notebook and looked at Yamamoto. The budget is aggressive but manageable. The organizational structure is sound. The program concept addresses a real gap in the industry. She paused. I recommend we approve it, with oversight and quarterly reviews to ensure we're getting value. Yamamoto nodded slowly, processing this recommendation. The board will vote. He looked around the table. All in favor of appointing Thomas Miller as Chief Technical Officer with authority to implement the program outlined in his proposal. Hands went up, not all of them. Mrs. Richardson raised hers immediately. Dr. Chen followed. 3 others joined them after a moment's hesitation. The young man who'd questioned Thomas kept his hand down. So did one other board member, an older man, who'd been silent throughout the meeting. 6 votes in favor, 2 opposed. Yamamoto stated it formally. The motion carries. Mr. Miller, welcome to Sterling Engine Works executive team. Thomas felt the room tilt slightly. This was real, actually happening. In 48 hours, he'd gone from janitor to chief technical officer. From invisible to seen. From nobody to somebody who mattered. When do I start today? Dr. Chen stood gathering her materials. We have 12 active projects that need immediate attention. 4 are running behind schedule. 2 are over budget. All of them were under Diana's oversight, which means we need to verify everything before proceeding. She looked at Thomas. Your first task is reviewing project files and identifying which ones can be salvaged and which need to be scrapped. You'll have full access to all engineering data, financial records, personnel files, anything you need. Thomas stood, legs feeling unsteady beneath him. I'll need a team. You can recruit whoever you want. Yamamoto gathered his papers. Within reason. Dr. Chen will help you navigate HR protocols and budget constraints. But the hiring decisions are yours. He paused at the door. One more thing, Mr. Miller. Diana Sterling built her empire by making people afraid to challenge her, to question her decisions, to speak uncomfortable truths. I'm trusting you to build something different. A culture where truth matters more than hierarchy, where the best idea wins regardless of who suggests it. Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of what Yamamoto was asking. I'll try. Don't try. Do. Yamamoto's voice carried the kind of certainty that came from building companies across 5 decades. Your father never got the recognition he deserved. Make sure the people you hire don't suffer the same fate. The meeting ended. Board members filed out, some offering congratulations, others keeping their skepticism visible. Thomas remained in the conference room, looking out floor-to-ceiling windows at Detroit spreading below. Somewhere out there, his father had worked for 3 decades in anonymity. Somewhere out there, Sarah was buried beside her mother in a cemetery Thomas hadn't visited since the funeral. Promise me you'll find your way back. He'd found his way back. Now he had to figure out what to do with the opportunity. Dr. Chen returned 15 minutes later with a stack of folders and a laptop. These are the active projects. I need you to review them and give me assessments by end of day tomorrow. She set everything on the conference table. Also, you'll need an office. I'm having Diana's space cleared and prepared for you. Thomas shook his head immediately. Not that office. Put me on the workshop floor, near the engines. That's where I need to be. Dr. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded. There's a smaller office adjacent to the main workshop, currently used for storage. We can convert it. That works. Thomas pulled the first folder toward him, opened it to pages of technical specifications and progress reports. One more thing. I need to start hiring, and I already know who I want. Darchen pulled out her tablet, fingers poised to take notes. Name's Jennifer Hayes. She's working as a mechanic at a gas station in Ohio. Community college dropout. Best diagnostic mind I've ever seen. Thomas flipped to the next folder. Marcus Chen. No relation to you. teaching high school auto shop in Indiana, applied to every engineering program in the country, rejected by all of them despite having better intuition for mechanical systems than most people with doctorates. He kept going, pulling names from memory, from observations, from 3 years of listening to people talk about problems they couldn't solve, and remembering the talented people he'd met who could have helped if anyone had given them a chance. Darnell Washington, truck driver, spends his nights studying mechanical engineering textbooks at rest stops, taught himself CAD software, designed a more efficient cooling system for long-haul engines, but nobody will look at his work because he doesn't have a degree. Dr. Chen's fingers flew across her tablet, recording names and details. How do you know all these people? I don't know them. I know about them. Internet forums, technical discussion groups, places where people who love engines gather even when the professional world won't let them in. Thomas closed the folder. These are the people conventional hiring misses, the ones who have talent but not credentials, who see problems differently because they learned outside the traditional system. He met Dr. Chen's eyes. Give me 6 months with them. If they don't perform, fire me and them both. But if they do perform, if they solve problems your traditional hires can't, then we expand the program. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, considering. Yamamoto will support this, but the board will be watching. Every mistake, every failure will be used as evidence that your approach doesn't work. Thomas nodded, accepting the reality. Then we won't make mistakes. Dr. Chen smiled slightly. Confident. I like that. Just make sure the confidence is justified. She closed her tablet and headed for the door. Paused. Thomas. Welcome to the hardest job you've ever had. Don't screw it up. The next 3 months were chaos. Thomas worked 18-hour days reviewing projects Diana had touched, identifying problems she'd hidden, developing solutions that should have been implemented years ago. He assembled his team one person at a time, making calls to gas stations and high schools and truck stops, convincing talented people that this opportunity was real, that someone was finally willing to value what they could do over where they'd learned to do it. Jennifer Hayes arrived first, 26 years old, working the night shift at a Sunoco in Columbus. She dropped out of community college after her mother got sick, needed money for medical bills, took the first job she could find. But in her spare time, she studied, learned, became the person other mechanics called when they encountered problems they couldn't solve. Thomas had found her on a technical forum answering questions about diagnostic software with a level of understanding that suggested genuine expertise. He'd contacted her directly, offered her a position as junior engineer at Sterling. She'd thought it was a scam at first. Nobody offered engineering jobs to gas station mechanics, but Thomas had been persistent, had sent her project specifications, had asked her to diagnose problems remotely, had proven the opportunity was real. Jennifer walked into Sterling Engine Works 3 weeks after Thomas's promotion, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. I don't have a degree, she'd said immediately when Thomas met her in the lobby. I dropped out. I know you know that, but I need to say it. I don't have credentials. I don't have references from fancy universities. I just have what I've taught myself. Thomas had smiled, remembering his own fear 3 months ago, his own certainty that he didn't belong in places like this. Show me what you can do. That's all that matters. Jennifer had shown him. Within a week, she'd identified inefficiencies in the Nakamura engine's cooling system that Thomas had missed. Within 2 weeks, she'd redesigned the diagnostic software to catch errors earlier in the testing process. Within 3 weeks, she'd become indispensable. Marcus Chen arrived next, 32 years old, teaching automotive repair to high school students in Gary, Indiana. He'd applied to 20 engineering programs over 5 years, rejected by all of them despite perfect technical knowledge. Too old, wrong background, no research experience. The excuses varied, but the message was always the same. You don't belong here. Marcus had accepted Thomas's offer with visible skepticism. Why me? There are thousands of people with better credentials, people who actually went to engineering school, people who won't embarrass you by not knowing the right terminology or the proper procedures. His voice had carried the weight of too many rejections, too many doors closed in his face. Because you understand systems in ways that can't be taught. Because you see connections that people with conventional training miss. Because talent matters more than credentials. Thomas had paused, And because my father spent 32 years being told he wasn't good enough despite being the best engineer in his facility. I'm done with that. We're done with that. Marcus had gone quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was different, steadier. When do I start? Within 6 months, Thomas had assembled a team of 15, gas station mechanics and high school teachers and truck drivers and people who'd taught themselves engineering through nights and weekends and sheer determination. Not one of them had a traditional degree. Not one would have been hired through conventional recruiting. All of them brought perspectives and skills that transformed how Sterling approached problems. The board watched skeptically. The traditional engineers resented them. But the results spoke louder than credentials. Projects that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward. Problems that had seemed unsolvable found solutions. The Nakamura contract was delivered 3 months ahead of schedule and under budget. Kenji Yamamoto sent Thomas a message after the Nakamura delivery. Your father would be proud. Keep building. But not everyone was celebrating. Diana Sterling's trial began 8 months after her arrest. Thomas attended on the first day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching the woman who had tried to destroy him face the consequences of her choices. She looked different, thinner, older. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by conservative business clothes that screamed attorney-selected respectability. Her hair had more gray, her face had more lines. Prison time, even brief, had extracted visible costs. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. Falsified reports, hidden failures, systematic fraud spanning 7 years, 80 million in potential losses to investors, 300 million in total exposure across government contracts and private agreements. The numbers were staggering. Diana's attorney tried to mount a defense, argued she'd been under tremendous pressure, that industry standards were unclear, that Sterling's board should have provided better oversight. But the evidence was overwhelming. The files Thomas had downloaded told a story of deliberate systematic deception. On the third day of trial, Diana changed her plea to guilty. Thomas watched her stand before the judge, watched her admit to crimes that would define the rest of her life, watched her accept responsibility for hurting people and companies and investors who trusted her. The judge sentenced her to 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. Diana Sterling, who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and fear, was led away in handcuffs to serve time in federal prison. Thomas left the courtroom feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, just a hollow recognition that destroying Diana hadn't fixed the systems that enabled her, hadn't changed the culture that rewarded her behavior until she got caught, hadn't prevented the next person with charm and credentials and complete lack of ethics from doing the same thing. He needed to build something better, something that would outlast any individual, something his father would recognize as worthy. The William Miller Institute for Engineering Excellence was announced on a cold morning in November, 11 months after Thomas had fixed the engine that changed everything. The press conference was held in Sterling's main auditorium, packed with employees and media and curious observers who'd followed Thomas's story from janitor to executive. Thomas stood at the podium looking out at 300 faces. Some he recognized, many he didn't. All of them were watching, waiting to hear what came next. 2 years ago, I stood in this room as a janitor. Most of you didn't know my name. Some of you walked past me every day for 3 years without ever seeing me. His voice carried through the auditorium, steady and clear. I was invisible, a ghost pushing a maintenance cart through hallways full of people who had better things to do than notice someone like me. Thomas paused, letting that image settle. Today I stand before you as Chief Technical Officer of a company that's transformed itself from the inside out. We've delivered 37 major projects ahead of schedule. We've created 400 new jobs. We've become the industry leader in advanced engine diagnostics and innovation. He looked around the room. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm not here to celebrate numbers or profits or market share. I'm here to announce something bigger, something that will change who we are as a company and what we stand for. Thomas gestured to Dr. Chen, who pressed a button. Behind him, a screen illuminated with words that made his throat tighten. The William Miller Institute for Engineering Excellence. Starting today, Sterling Engine Works is establishing a new division dedicated to identifying and developing non-traditional engineering talent. We are committing $100 million over the next 5 years to scholarships, training programs, and apprenticeships for people who've been overlooked by the traditional education system. The room buzzed with surprised murmurs. Thomas continued, This institute is named after my father, William Miller. He worked at Ford for 32 years. He could diagnose any engine problem by sound alone. He taught me everything I know about listening to machines and respecting their secrets. Thomas's voice thickened with emotion he didn't try to hide. He never received a promotion, never received recognition, never received the respect his genius deserved because he didn't have a degree, didn't have connections, didn't fit the mold of what an engineer was supposed to look like. He paused, composing himself. My father died believing his knowledge would disappear with him, that the world didn't have a room for people like him, people with talent but without credentials, with skill but without status, with genius but without degrees. Thomas looked directly into the cameras. He was wrong, and this institute will prove it. The applause started slowly, then built. Within moments, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Thomas waited for it to quiet, then continued. The first class of William Miller Fellows will begin this fall. We've received over 3,000 applications from across the country. Mechanics, truck drivers, factory workers. Anyone with a passion for engineering and a willingness to learn. Dr. Chen stood and walked to the microphone, seamless transition that spoke to hours of preparation. And I'm proud to announce that one of our fellows is someone with a rather unique background. The screen changed to show a photograph. Diana Sterling. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Thomas watched the reaction carefully, knowing this would be controversial. The woman who'd nearly destroyed the company being offered a scholarship by the man she tried to destroy. But it was the right choice. Not because Diana deserved redemption, because second chances were the foundation of everything Thomas had built. Dr. Chen raised her hand for quiet. Ms. Sterling applied like any other candidate. She went through the same evaluation process. She was judged by the same criteria, and she was selected because she demonstrated the same qualities we look for in all our fellows: humility, willingness to learn, and genuine commitment to becoming better than who she was. She looked at Thomas, who returned to the podium. I know what you're thinking. How can we offer this opportunity to someone who hurts so many people? How can we welcome back the woman who personified everything wrong with this company? Thomas paused. Here's my answer, because that's exactly what the William Miller Institute is supposed to do. It's supposed to give chances to people who wouldn't get them anywhere else. It's supposed to look past credentials and backgrounds and see the potential underneath. His voice strengthened. Diana Sterling committed crimes. She served her time. She's faced consequences that will follow her for the rest of her life. But she also demonstrated something during her incarceration: a willingness to change, a recognition of her failures, a genuine desire to become someone different. Thomas looked around the room. My father was judged by his background and dismissed despite his brilliance. Diana Sterling will be judged by her background and given a chance despite her failures. Both of them deserve better than being defined by their circumstances. He stepped back from the microphone. This institute isn't about rewarding good people or punishing bad ones. It's about recognizing that everyone has the potential to contribute something valuable. The question is whether we're wise enough to see it. The applause started again, slower this time, more thoughtful. But within moments, the entire auditorium was standing. Employees who'd watched Thomas mop floors were now cheering his vision. Executives who dismissed him were applauding his leadership. Camera crews captured images that would be broadcast around the world. And somewhere in the audience, Thomas knew Diana Sterling sat watching the man she tried to destroy offer her the chance to become someone new. 18 months later, Thomas Miller stood in a cemetery in Dearborn, looking at Sarah's headstone in early morning light. He came here once a month now, sometimes more often. It had taken him a year after her death to visit at all the pain too raw, too immediate. But now he found comfort in these visits, found clarity. Hey, baby. His voice was quiet in the empty cemetery. Big day today. He knelt in the grass beside her stone, running his fingers across her name engraved in granite. Diana graduates from the Institute this afternoon. Top of her class. Can you believe that the woman who tried to destroy me spent 18 months learning to be an engineer? And she's good at it. Really good. Thomas smiled slightly. She got a job offer too. Not at Sterling, small company in Ohio. They design engines for agricultural equipment. Not glamorous, but honest work. He paused. She asked me to come to the graduation. Said she wanted to thank me publicly. I told her no. This isn't about me. It's about her becoming someone new. The wind rustled through trees surrounding the cemetery. Thomas sat back on his heels looking at Sarah's photograph embedded in the headstone. Young, healthy, smiling like she knew secrets the world hadn't learned yet. I'm thinking about retiring. The words came out before Thomas had fully decided to say them. My Dr. Chen can run Sterling. She's better at the business side than I'll ever be. And the Institute is established now. It doesn't need me anymore. He touched the cold stone. I want to come home, Sarah. Not here, but to the work that matters, the teaching, the passing on of knowledge. There's a garage space available on Woodward Avenue, close to where Dad had his shop. I'm thinking about opening something there. Free diagnostics, training for anyone who wants to learn, the kind of place Dad would have loved. Thomas stood slowly, joints protesting. Promise me you'll remember who you are. That's what you said. So, I remember, baby. I remember who I am. Not who I was before you got sick. Not who I became after you died. Who I am now. Someone who's learned that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give away. He kissed his fingers and touched them to her name. I love you. I'll always love you. And I'll keep making you proud. Every single day, Thomas walked back to his car, leaving behind flowers he'd brought and the weight of grief that had carried for so long. The sadness remained, would always remain, but it no longer crushed him, no longer made breathing difficult. It had transformed into something else, a reminder of what he'd had, what he'd lost, what he'd learned from both. Diana Sterling's graduation ceremony was held in Sterling's auditorium, the same room where Thomas had announced the Institute 18 months earlier. 52 fellows graduated that day. Mechanics and truck drivers and factory workers who'd proven that talent mattered more than pedigree, who'd demonstrated skills that traditional education had overlooked or dismissed. Thomas watched from the back row, deliberately invisible again, not because he had to be, because he chose to be. This day belonged to the graduates, to people who'd taken risks and worked hard and earned something the world had told them they'd never deserve. Diana Sterling crossed the stage to receive her certificate, her movements careful, measured nothing like the predatory confidence she'd displayed 2 years ago. She looked healthy now, stronger. The prison pallor had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Dr. Chen handed her the certificate and shook her hand. Diana smiled genuine warmth that Thomas had never seen before. She looked out at the audience, found Thomas in the back row despite his attempts to remain unseen. Their eyes met. She nodded once. He nodded back. Then she walked off the stage and into the rest of her life. The reception afterward was crowded. Graduates celebrating with family and friends. Sterling employees congratulating people they doubted would succeed. Thomas moved through the edges of it, offering congratulations where appropriate, staying out of the center of attention. Diana found him near the refreshment table, holding a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. You came, she said, it simply statement of fact rather than gratitude. I said I would. Thomas set down the cup. Congratulations. Top of your class is impressive. Diana shrugged. Turns out when you actually care about learning instead of just collecting credentials, you absorb more. She paused. I got the job offer from the company in Ohio, farm equipment design. Not sexy, not powerful, nothing like Sterling, but it's real work. Yes, real work. Diana was quiet for a moment. I wanted to thank you for the scholarship, for the chance, for believing I could change even when I didn't believe it myself. Thomas nodded, accepting the thanks without making it larger than it needed to be. What are you going to do now? Move to Ohio, start fresh, build something small and good instead of something large and corrupt. Diana looked at him carefully. What about you? Dr. Chen says you're thinking about retiring. Thomas was surprised Dr. Chen had shared that information, but not upset. I am. The Institute doesn't need me anymore. Sterling is in good hands. It's time for something else. Like what? Like teaching. Like going back to what my father did. Passing on knowledge to anyone who wants to learn. Building relationships instead of empires. Diana studied him for a long moment. You've already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. Why walk away now? Because I'm not walking away. I'm walking towards something else. Something that matters more than titles or salaries or being important. Thomas met her eyes. My wife taught me that. The measure of a person isn't how far they climb. It's how they treat people who can do nothing for them. I climbed far enough. Now I want to help other people climb. Diana nodded slowly, processing this. Your wife sounds like she was extraordinary. She was. Thomas felt a familiar ache, but also something else. Gratitude for having known her, for having been changed by her. I hope I get the chance to become half as wise. Diana extended her hand. Thank you, Thomas, for everything, for stopping me when I needed to be stopped, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for showing me that it's possible to change. Thomas shook her hand. Take care of yourself, Diana, and remember what you learned here. Not just the engineering, the rest of it. Diana smiled slightly. I will. I promise. She walked away into the crowd. Thomas watched her go, watched her shake hands with other graduates, watched her move through the world differently than she had 2 years ago. Not predatory, not calculating, just human. Just someone trying to build something good from the ruins of what she'd destroyed. He left the reception early, drove through Detroit streets he'd known his entire life, ended up at the garage space on Woodward Avenue he'd been considering. It was small, run down, nothing fancy, but it had good bones, good light, enough space for the work he wanted to do. Thomas stood outside looking at the empty building, imagining what it could become. A place where people could bring engines they couldn't afford to fix and get help without judgment. A place where young people could learn skills that would serve them regardless of whether they went to college. A place his father would recognize as worthy. The William Miller Memorial Garage. He said it out loud, testing how it sounded. Free engine diagnostics for anyone who needs it. The words felt right, felt true, felt like coming full circle to where everything started. His father's garage. The lessons learned there. The knowledge passed down. The belief that everyone deserved help regardless of whether they could pay for it. Thomas pulled out his phone and called the number on the for lease sign, made an appointment to see the space, started planning what came next. 2 years after fixing the engine that changed everything, Thomas Miller retired from Sterling Engine Works. The announcement surprised the business press, but not the people who knew him best. Dr. Chen understood immediately. Yamamoto sent a message saying simply, "Your father would approve." The retirement party was small, just his team, the 15 people he'd hired when nobody else would have considered them. Jennifer Hayes, now senior diagnostics engineer. Marcus Chen leading the Institute's apprenticeship program. Darnell Washington designing cooling systems that outperformed anything the traditional engineers had produced. They gathered in the workshop, the space where Thomas had insisted his office be located, surrounded by engines and tools and the smell of oil and possibility. Jennifer spoke for the group, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had proven her worth. You changed our lives, all of us. We were gas station mechanics and high school teachers and truck drivers. Nobody saw us. Nobody valued what we could do. You saw us, and you gave us the chance to become who we were meant to be. She paused. We know you're not really retiring. You're just changing the work. But we wanted to thank you for believing in us, for fighting for us, for building something that will outlast all of us. Thomas felt his throat tighten. These were the people his father should have worked with, the colleagues William Miller deserved, the recognition that came 50 years too late for one man, but just in time for others. My father used to say that knowledge dies when it's not passed on, that the greatest tragedy isn't failure. It's having something valuable to share and nobody willing to listen. Thomas looked around at faces that had become family. You listened, you learned, you proved that talent matters more than credentials, that dedication beats pedigree, that the willingness to work hard and think differently can overcome every institutional barrier the world puts in your way. He paused. I'm not retiring because I'm done. I'm retiring because the work here is finished. The institute is established. The culture is changed. Sterling values different perspectives now. Values you. Thomas smiled. My next job is different. Teaching people who'll never work at Sterling, who'll never get hired by big companies, who just need their car fixed and can't afford a mechanic. Teaching them the way my father taught me. Passing on knowledge because it's the right thing to do. Because it's how we honor the people who taught us. The team applauded. Not the overwhelming standing ovation from the Institute announcement. Something quieter, more personal. the appreciation of people who understood what he was really saying. After they left, Thomas stood alone in the workshop one final time, ran his hand along the workbench where he'd repaired the Nakamura engine, remembered the fear and certainty and desperate need to prove he was still someone worth seeing. He was someone worth seeing now, but more importantly, he'd helped others be seen, had built something that would continue long after he was gone, had honored his father's memory and kept his promise to Sarah. Thomas turned off the workshop lights and walked out. Didn't look back. Forward was where he needed to go. The William Miller Memorial Garage opened on a Saturday morning in September. The sign above the door was simple. No chrome, no fancy graphics, just words painted on wood by Thomas's own hand. Free engine diagnostics. All welcome. By noon, a line stretched around the block. Single mothers with cars that wouldn't start. Elderly men with trucks that had served them for decades. Teenagers with first cars held together by hope and duct tape. People who couldn't afford mechanics and couldn't understand why their engines had stopped working. Thomas helped them all, showed young people how to listen to their engines, taught single parents basic maintenance that could save them hundreds in repair bills, passed on his father's wisdom to anyone willing to learn. Every engine has a heartbeat, he told them, repeating words his father had spoken 40 years earlier. You just have to know how to listen. One afternoon, a young woman walked into the garage with an engine part in her hands and frustration on her face. I can't figure out what's wrong with it. I've tried everything. Thomas took the part and examined it carefully. Within seconds, he identified the problem. A hairline crack invisible to the untrained eye, causing pressure loss that made the engine run rough. See this? He pointed to the crack. That's your culprit. Easy fix if you know what you're looking for. The woman stared at him with amazement. How did you find that so fast? Thomas smiled, feeling his father's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. My father taught me a long time ago, in a garage a lot like this one. He said machines speak to those who know how to listen. He handed her a replacement part from his carefully organized inventory. Now I'm teaching you, so you can teach someone else. That's how knowledge survives, by being passed on. The woman took the part with trembling hands, gratitude written across her face. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Just Thomas. He'd spent enough time being Mr. Miller, being chief technical officer, being the man who exposed corporate fraud and built institutes. Now he wanted to be just Thomas, just someone helping people who needed help. She left with her repaired part and new understanding of what machines could teach her. Thomas watched her go, then turned back to the next person in line. Behind him on the workshop wall, 3 photographs hung in simple frames. William Miller in his Ford uniform looking proud and tired. Sarah Miller on their wedding day smiling like she knew secrets the world hadn't learned. And a newspaper clipping from 2 years ago showing a janitor named Thomas Miller standing at a podium announcing the creation of an institute that would change thousands of lives. Thomas looked at those photographs every day. They reminded him of where he'd come from, where he was going, and why the journey mattered. Late one evening, as Thomas was closing up the garage, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Diana Sterling. She looked different now. Stronger, more confident, but not in the predatory way she'd carried herself before. This was the confidence of someone who'd earned their place through hard work and genuine growth. Thomas, Diana. She walked into the garage looking around at the tools and equipment and photographs on the wall. I heard about this place. Wanted to see it for myself. What do you think? Diana smiled, warmth that seemed impossible 2 years ago. I think your father would be proud. Thomas nodded, accepting the observation. That's the idea. Diana picked up a wrench, tested its weight in her hand. I graduated last month. Top of my class at the Institute, I heard. Congratulations. I got a job offer too. Small company in Ohio. They design engines for agricultural equipment. She paused. Not exactly glamorous, but it's honest work. Thomas said what she seemed unable to. Yes, Diana set down the wrench. Honest work. Something I never understood before. The satisfaction of building something real instead of manipulating numbers on a screen. She looked at Thomas directly. I came here to say thank you. Not just for the scholarship, for everything. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For believing I could change when no one else did. Thomas was quiet for a moment, choosing his response carefully. You did the hard work, Diana. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. Diana's eyes glistened. For 55 years, I chased power and wealth and status. I climbed over everyone in my path. I destroyed people without a second thought. Her voice cracked slightly, and at the end of all that climbing, I had nothing. Nothing real, nothing meaningful, nothing that would survive me. She gestured around the garage. But this, what you've built here, this will last forever. Every person you teach will teach someone else. Every life you change will change other lives. That's real legacy. That's what matters. Thomas thought about his father, about Sarah, about the long journey from invisibility to recognition and back to something simpler and more meaningful. That's what my wife taught me, that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, it's what you give away. Diana nodded slowly. She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was. Thomas felt the familiar ache transformed into gratitude. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd traveled very different paths to arrive at the same understanding. I should go, Diana said finally. Early flight tomorrow. New job, new city, new life. Good luck, Diana. And remember what you learned. I will. She extended her hand. For everything, Thomas, truly. Thomas shook her hand. Take care of yourself. And remember that knowledge dies when it's not passed on. Diana smiled. I'll remember. She walked to the door, then stopped. Thomas, yeah, that night in the boardroom. When you fixed the engine and I tried to destroy you. I've thought about it 1,000 times. Wondered what would have happened if you'd just stayed invisible. If you'd kept your head down and let me win. Thomas considered the question honestly. I'd still be mopping floors, and you'd still be heading toward that cliff you couldn't see. Diana nodded slowly. Then I'm glad you stood up, even if it cost me everything. Because it taught me something I never would have learned any other way. What's that? That some battles are worth fighting even when you lose. And some victories aren't victories at all. She walked out into the night. Thomas watched her go, watched her move into a future that looked nothing like the empire she'd built, but might actually make her happy. He turned off the lights and locked the door. Outside, stars burned bright above Detroit, the same stars that had watched over William Miller's garage decades ago, the same stars that would watch over Thomas's garage for years to come. And somewhere beyond the lights of the city and the noise of the world, Sarah was smiling. Thomas walked to his car, got in, and drove toward home. He was 58 years old now. His knees still ached. His back still hurt. His body reminded him daily that time was not unlimited. But his heart was full. His legacy was secure. And his father's dream, the dream that talent would one day be recognized, regardless of credentials, that genius would one day be valued, regardless of background, that the invisible people would one day be seen, was finally irrevocably, permanently real. Thomas Miller had started as a janitor. He'd become a leader. And now he was something even more important. He was a teacher. And that was the greatest victory of all.